Okay. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to have you on the other side of your camera. I hope you're having a fantastic Wednesday. And this is the first in our sustainability series for 2022 with the amazing City of South Perth. We've run this for the last 4 years, and it's been a wonderful privilege. And we've run all sorts of things to really inspire and empower you to live more sustainably. So, as I said, this is the first of 4 fantastic online presentations we're doing with the City of South Perth. So tonight is really about how we can reimagine our homes and our communities, how we can do things in a more sustainable way into the future. Because we face some enormous challenges moving forward, and you would have to have been living in a cave or underground to not know about the things that are happening. My dog is just whining to come in. But we've got some enormous challenges, particularly in this part of the world in Western Australia. We're the fastest drying part of the world's driest continent. And I say that one with deliberate gravity. You know, we are the fastest drying part of the world's driest continent, which means we are really being challenged by climate change faster than almost anywhere else on the planet. We have the worst soils in the world. We have one of the windiest cities in the world as well, which means we have these hot, dry winds that are causing all sorts of problems for us. And then the way we develop. We have really gone for the sprawling idea in terms of how we develop. And we have some of the most inefficient, energy-hungry homes that have been built on the planet. So these are really taking us in a direction that is far away from sustainability. But the good news is there's lots that we're going to talk about tonight that is really going to inspire and empower you to make changes. Very importantly, if we do have internet dropout, we live in a world where we spend a lot of money on the NBN, but it doesn't necessarily mean it always goes without a glitch. If we do drop out, hang in there. We will be back. I've got the most amazing tech team behind the scenes, Chris and Jacob, and we got wonderful Lexi helping out. So we will be back. We're going to do some polls during this event so that you can actually put some questions, and we want to find out what the event means for you. So that's really, really important for us to make sure that we are giving you the information. You'll have chance to ask questions. So we're really looking forward to getting your questions so we can give you the live feedback on questions. We also have 2 amazing other presenters tonight. Melinda Marshall, she's an absolute champion, a wonderful planner. What I've learned about planners, and you'll hear about my project and my property tonight, what I've learned about planners is they're like really good lawyers. They understand the arcane world of planning, just as lawyers understand the arcane world of law. And a good planner will know about precedents and will be able to help you create something amazing on your property. So Melinda's amazing. And then David Bayer, who is a fantastic, one of these guys who's great at everything. He's a builder, he's a sustainability expert, and he's a self-made architect. So he really understands and has walked the talk. He's done some amazing infill developments in his part of the world. So we often tag this event tonight Inspired Infill, because I don't know about you, but when I see a lot of infill, and infill is where we take an established suburb, often with existing older homes, and we think the only way to get greater density is to either knock it all down and put in 4 or 5 battleship grey amorphous apartment blocks, or we just truncate, build a great big driveway and build another house in what was once the back garden. That's called a battle axe development. And they're very uninspiring. They're not doing anything to really allow us to meet the challenges of creating a climate resilient and beautiful landscape and nourishing community to live in. So tonight is all about really showing you the alternative ways to inspire and empower you to be able to do things differently. So we've got a fantastic presentation, which I'm going to kick on with tonight. So the first thing I really wanted to talk to you about is really setting the scene for where we are and what's going on. Okay, so you see that little insignia on the top there. I'm going to talk a lot more about that tonight because they are the apartments that we're building on our part of the world. But I really wanted to set the scene for you. So can everyone see that on the slide? Oh, okay. Sorry, my apologies. I should know that. Okay. There we go. That's doing some interesting things. Okay, so setting the scene. So, okay, really important for us to remember that There's a lot that we get told about the way we build houses in Western Australia that is a long way from the truth. We have a big housing industry in Western Australia that is very big on volume and very big on using a crude, blunt instrument in terms of the way we create and service the community with housing, which doesn't necessarily meet with our needs or have any alignment with the facts. So I'm going to give you some of those facts now. So number one, most importantly, is that only a third of the housing demand in Western Australia is for a house with 2, 3, or 4 bedrooms. Only a third. That means roughly 70% of the housing demand is for empty nesters like my mum. She murdered my dad and buried him in the back garden. And is this going live? I probably shouldn't be telling everyone that. So my mum's on her own. Then you get young couples who don't have any kids, or you basically have single or couples. In other words, either at the end of their life where the kids have all moved out, or at the beginning, and they just don't need these enormous houses. The point I'm trying to make is that a large percentage of the population just don't need these enormous rattling houses, which are fundamentally what's on offer. And that's then fueled by the real estate agents who largely will tell you you need to build a big house to get return on investment. So suddenly this momentum is that we have to build big houses. And that's been in play for a long period of time. And if you have a look at it, we see that sadly, what's been happening over the last 30 to 40 years is our houses have been getting bigger in terms of square meterage. The lot sizes are getting smaller, the family unit is getting smaller, and the number of close connections that we cite in our lives, the nourishing connections with friends and family, has shrunk. The only thing that's got bigger through the last 30 to 40 years is the square meterage of our houses, to the point now where we have some of the biggest houses in the world. Have a look at this graph here, and it's quite shocking. It shows you that modern, funky, hip, cool, bohemian Europe and Asia, modern cities, beautiful cities that we flock to when we can go overseas because we hone in on that culture and that vibrancy. The average house size in those areas is 50 to 60 square meters. That's the average house size. Come back to Western Australia and we have the biggest houses in the world. They can be over 240 square meters in size. So we're building these enormous houses with 3 carports and 2 home theatre systems and an extra study and all these rooms and triple bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is, firstly, it's not servicing our demands, and we have big problems with that. So we have the biggest houses in the world, and you have to ask the question, why? And if we inspect this in a little bit of detail, you see that these enormous houses that we build, and have a look at this image there, and all these little red dots that you can see, that's where they've put trackers on the family living in this house. So they're heat monitors, and they've shown or looked at where the main activities are in this typical large house. We often call them a McMansion or the trophy house. And if you have a look at that slide carefully, you see that there are ghost rooms. These rooms where no one ever goes. So someone's working, paying off a mortgage, driving every day to work to go and be a slave to some job they probably don't like very much to pay for a room that nobody uses. So you see these enormous houses with these big rooms that you're paying for that fundamentally aren't used. So if we have a look at the big house, and there it is in all its glory, the Australian, but particularly the West Australian McMansion, if we align it with the principles of sustainability, of resilience, of creating spaces that nourish and nurture the family unit, that translate from being a house to a home, we see that they really don't stack up. So number one, a big house means a big mortgage. And if any of you watch any of the financial commentary that's going on, people like Alan Kohler, they will tell you that we have one of the highest debt ratios of any OECD country. So with cheap loans and cheap money, people have been building these enormous houses, so they end up having enormous debt. We have one of the highest rates of debt in the Western world because we think we have to build these enormous houses. And big houses mean less meaningful relationships. One of the saddest statistics that I heard was since the inception of the series Neighbours, and sadly, as you probably know, or not sadly, depending on if you like Neighbours, That show finished about 2 months ago, so it did about 9,000 episodes. The point I'm trying to make is some sociologists looked at what was happening in the trends of human populations in Western Australia and Australia over those 40 years of Neighbours. And since that time, the number of meaningful relationships that we now cite has dropped. So before Neighbours, and I'm not saying there's any correlation between Neighbours and the number of close connections we cite, but it's symbolizing the trend downwards. So we used to cite about 15 nourishing, strong connections with humans in our life. Now it's down to about 9. What a tragedy. I guarantee on our deathbeds, we will not care how many pool rooms we had or how many home theatre systems we had. We will lament the fact we just didn't have as many nourishing connections with human beings. So the bigger houses mean people are moving off into different rooms. It's not creating that fabric to be able to create those meaningful connections. And of course, as houses get bigger and lots get smaller, you do the math, there's less room for the garden. So we have the situation now where we have these big edifices to ourselves with no gardens. And my mantra, my great raison d'etre is to say to people, the garden should be the biggest room of your home. Imagine that, where the garden is the biggest room of your home, where you're celebrating and have this beautiful blend between the house and the garden. But when you have this enormous house, most of the time, the best that you can do is to say that you just have this little tacked on afterthought, which could be a garden. Now, remember, please don't forget you can ask questions. You just need to use the Q&A button, which you should have on your computer. And if you don't know, anyone under the age of 20 will be able to show you how to do it. So we really want to get those questions. So big houses mean big bills. Now, a big house like the one you can see on the screen, the big house on there will have a massive energy consumption footprint, because fundamentally these houses with a black roof, big windows are just going to be a trap for the West Australian summer heat. So you end up having large bills to air condition those homes. They use large amounts of water, but fundamentally, they are the ones that are going to really make it difficult for you to service your debts, because they are energy hungry. We are going to see these as stranded assets into the future because they just are not efficient homes to live in. And then a big house means big waste. We have one of the highest rates of waste production in the Western world. So often what happens when you see a big house like this, prior to that house being built a couple of years ago, there was probably a perfectly good home that was there that nourished and nurtured 1 or 2 families. It just gets knocked down to build this great big new house. So we have big waste because we assume we have to get rid of houses. I heard recently that the average life expectancy of a house in Western Australia is 28 years. 28 years. Try saying that to modern Europe or Asia, where houses might be hundreds of years old. 28 years. So these houses are being knocked down, dumped at landfill, or when we build, there is massive amounts of waste simply because many of them are just volume homes. So they just buy a certain amount of product and it's not nuanced. So you end up with large amounts of waste. Very big waste with the way we build. And big houses means, sadly, big kids. And by big, I mean fat. We have one of the highest rates of childhood obesity in the world. And what I'm saying fundamentally is a large driver for that is we have kids that are living in enormous houses with great big addictive screens and no garden. Who would want to go out as a kid and explore in this garden? And God forbid if it's artificial turf. Artificial turf for me is like screaming, kids, never go outside, because artificial turf is going to get outrageously hot in summer, up to 85 degrees. It is no substitute for a real garden. So a real garden should have swings and cubby houses and secret spaces where kids can explore. And what we are now finding, this is really, really important. Pediatricians and child neurologists are now finding that so much of the obesity, the anxiety, the depression, all of these modern, what we call 21st century ailments, fundamentally are to do with the fact that kids are just not getting enough wild time in nature. I talked to a neurologist a few weeks ago, and he said, I wish I could get every single parent to get their kids into wild nature, because it's only going out into wild nature. That means going over logs and rocks and really in unstable, wild environments, going on bush paths, all of those sorts of things. That actually gets the brain constantly out of its loop of being in a cycle, which can lead to a depression and anxiety. The brain has to think about the natural environment it's in, and we are hardwired to feel more connected and get a sense of peace and ease when we're in wild environments. So you can start by having a beautiful garden, and if you don't have that, you are fundamentally going to have a problem. Okay, so a question has come up and said, once a house has finished its life cycle, how can we make sure those products are recyclable and sustainable? Great question. So there's lots of recycled construction and demolition waste products available. You can go to companies like Earth Care Recycling and Red Sands. Now, these are two fantastic companies that make their living out of recycling construction and demolition offcuts or excesses or rubbish material. So we use, for instance, a lot of recycled crushed up bricks and tiles in our landscaping. And I'll hopefully show you some photos either tonight or in the rest of this series going on, and they'll blow your mind. They are beautiful products for landscaping and mulching, and they're all made out of recycled construction and demolition waste. So lots that you can do. And then finally, a big house means less trees. And please, we must as a civilization recognize that the biggest problem we face is we just are removing our trees. And we're removing them at a horrific rate. And as our cities get hotter with the impacts of climate change, we desperately need to have trees in these urban environments. And we've got some real estate stats coming up soon, which will blow your mind and show you the value of trees, not only to create these beautiful shaded environments, but to increase the real estate value of your property. I'll ask this question of everyone: where are the most sought after, affluent cities or suburbs in Western Australia? You know, those outrageously expensive places to live? We're talking about Mosman Park, we're talking about Nedlands, we're talking about Claremont, Jutland Parade, all of those areas, and they are described as the leafy green suburbs. I was driving through Nedlands today, and you just get this beautiful canopy closure of these trees lining the streets. They are the affluent, most sought after suburbs. And what do they have? They have trees retained and nurtured and nourished and really enshrined as part of that building environment. Somehow we've been told, though, that no, you need to remove trees if you are trying to capitalize on your real estate investment. And I say, fundamentally, that's just simply moving in the wrong direction. When we have a 49-degree day in Perth, and we will get them with the impacts of climate change, you are going to thank that you have these beautiful trees that can shade, nourish, and nurture. So we've already had a question, what trees to plant around a house? Hold that thought. I've got some wonderful lists for you. And these presentations will be available for you on the South Perth website. So you'll be able to view them at your leisure and tell anyone. We want this to not be a big kept secret. We want West Australians to really understand this. And this is really one of the reasons why we have these big houses and these big sprawling suburbs. Did you know that we are something like 9 times the size of London with this fraction of a population? So we sprawl from Yanchep to the north right down to pretty much Bustleton at the south. It's an enormous corridor of growth, sprawl, fundamentally driven by the fact that we use cars. We are one of the highest car dependency of any civilization in the Western world. And if you have a look at it, the car is king. And we end up building these suburbs, and we've paid for this land. If you have a look at this slide here to the right, where you've got the big black roofs, what a great idea black roofs are in Perth in the middle of summer. Can you imagine standing on that roof on a 45-degree day in Perth? And we wonder why those houses would have to have the air conditioner 24 hours a day, trying to battle against that heat. So somewhere coal is being burnt, heating up the planet to keep dumb houses and dumb developments cool. That is not sustainability. We really need to shake off this idea and move in a different direction. But if you look at that development, the biggest prime real estate of that development on the right is given over to the car. Why do we feel we have to connect with the house and the car? It's a very unique Australian idea that you have to have the house and the car almost living within the same area. And we'll show you some alternatives soon. There it is. Look at the difference there, that massive amount of real estate. And the way that you have to design these, and I know because we've had to, for the development I'm going to show you soon, we've had to look at how we put the housing and the parking together. You have to, by law, design these parking areas so something like a Hertz or a budget truck can go in and turn around. That's ludicrous. Obviously, that might be a fraction of the time you would bring a truck in, and yet you have to design it so that the biggest truck can actually go in, turn around, and come out again. So you've got all of this area given over to concrete, less grass, less area for the kids, and it's just going to absorb that heat. Remember, any hard surface, concrete, bitumen, and God forbid, artificial turf, on a stinking hot day, that is just going to absorb that heat over 16 hours of relentless baking sun. And when the sun finally goes down at the end of the day, and you go, thank God that hot day's over. All that happens now is that stored heat energy is just released. So all you'll see in those new suburbs where there are no trees, all you'll hear at night is the whirring air conditioners trying to keep people comfortable over those long, hot nights, simply because there's too much paving and not enough trees. And we'll talk more about that soon. So I want to introduce you to the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home, which is what I'm doing on my property. Some of you may have been through tours when we had the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home open. But what we're doing now is we're taking it to the next stage and saying, okay, how do we do infill in a more inspired way? So this in the background is what we're going to be talking about. We love it so much, we've even put it on the shirt. But the important thing is we're trying to show people that you can do a development that is so much more inspired, that is more sustainable, that is going to create nourishing connections for human beings and enshrine the trees as one of the most precious and important parts of that development. Okay, so here it is. We call it a tree-friendly development. But sadly, just going backwards for a moment, look at that. So this is typically what happens. We take a perfectly good house and in comes the excavator and it smashes it all up. And then most of it gets taken to the tip. And we have some of the most beautiful timbers on the planet. And a lot of the framing of these houses is gorgeous Jarrah or maybe Carry. And what happens is it just gets smashed up because labor's too expensive or it's all too hard to denail and salvage that wood. So it just gets smashed up. And if you're lucky, it might be used as firewood. But this precious, beautiful timber that has hundreds of years of life still left in it and embodied carbon, etc., is just wasted simply so we can build more of these developments that you can see on the bottom right-hand side. And then we replace it with this. Now, if I'm thinking about a nourished, connected community where people feel there's a network of people to support them through the big anxiety and stresses of COVID, this is not the house that I'd be thinking of. This is a house where it's boarded up against the world. It's surrounded by artificial turf. And that is essentially, from my perspective, nothing more than a house. It's not a home. It's got no connection. And remember, most of us grew up with beautiful gardens where we shared it with the other members of the family, or can I please let my dog in for 2 minutes? I'm going to sell him to a vivisectionist. Cookie, come in. Quick, and sit down. All right, just to show that we not only have kids, we have dogs in the family. So the important thing is that we are building these houses where there is no connection. And again, we are living in a world now where we desperately need connection with other human beings. And increasingly people cite loneliness as one of the major problems that they suffer with. The UK government has a minister for loneliness. That's how big a problem it is for us. Loneliness is unraveling the fabric that ties us all together. And a big part of it is that we have substituted connected communities for this style of development. It's not being put through any form of critique to see whether it's going to be sustainable from an environmental, social, and even economic perspective. Okay, and then you think about that, and then think about what happens if we roll this out across our suburbs. And one of the big challenges of the Western world now is the heat island effect. The heat island effect. So this is an international problem that cities are grappling with. Again, when we remove the vegetation and we replace it with brick and paving and concrete, and as I said, God forbid, artificial turf. That means now that we have all these hard surfaces absorbing the heat, there's no shading from vegetation, and those suburbs can be anywhere from 6 to 12 degrees hotter than a leafy green suburb. So when we get the heat wave, which we've had a lot of this summer in Perth, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in a treeless plain where the only thing protecting you from the extremes of the weather is a whirring air conditioner? And what if you can't afford the whirring air conditioner? What if we start to put a carbon price, which is going to make those sorts of systems unviable for a lot of people? These are big challenges that we face. So if you have a look at the difference, where would you rather be on that stinking hot suburb? And we all would obviously recognize that we want to be in the leafy green suburb. We all know when we park the car at a shopping center car park on a stinking hot day, if there's a shady spot under a tree, we all gravitate towards that. So we know inherently the value of shade, but somehow this is now filtered to the fact where, oh, we can't have trees on our urban environment. And that's just simply not the case. So we're going to talk more about that, particularly in relation to my development on my property. How do we get the council to plant more trees? They will oil the squeaky wheel. You have no idea how much power you have as ratepayers. You can simply talk to your local councillor. You can ask to speak to your environment officer or your sustainability officer or your parks and gardens officer and say, I want more trees planted in my suburbs and in my streets. It's really going to be all of us en masse demanding more of this. The good news is South Perth in particular, who we do a lot of work with, they're very passionate in this space. And most cities now have a street verge program, and you can register for those. You might be a bit late for this year, but you get your name down on this list. And the great thing about these street trees is the council puts it in and manages it for you on your verge. And I've got some incredible statistics coming up soon on what a well-managed, beautiful street tree will do to the value of your property. Hold your thought on that one. So all of us need to be demanding more. We have a federal election coming up. Demand more from our politicians. We need to be building cities. We need to be building communities that are going to help us meet the challenges of a hotter, more erratically dry ecosystem into the future. It's absolutely critical. All right, so let me introduce you to the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home and what we call the Eco Apartments or the Hammy Hill Hamlet. We're big on alliteration, so we've got the 3 H's in there. And you can see in the foreground our beautiful tree. And that is our gorgeous jacaranda, which is the centerpiece for the garden. It's about 70 years old and it stands there as the real cornerstone of that garden. Now, typical development would say, let's just clear it all, get rid of the tree, done. But we were passionate about saying there's enough people in Western Australia now who value trees, who want them enshrined and integrated into developments. So we've broken a few rules, and I'll talk more about that. And Melinda tonight will talk more about that with you. That's our wonderful planner, to show you how we've been able to do that. And just in relation to that, I'm passionate about all of us doing more to live the life that we're meant to have. Don't die with your music in you. And from my perspective, one of the greatest ways that we can lead a fulfilling, resilient, and rewarding, rich life is to build beautiful homes and communities where we are allowed to flourish. And flourishing human beings are always in vibrant communities, whether that's a household community or you have people coming into your home or your network of neighbors, the local cafe. What you're seeing in the resilient communities around the world, what they all have in common, these communities that have really pushed their way through the horrors of COVID and have come out the other side stronger, those communities will all cite strong community connections. They will cite that building those communities, building those spaces where you have vibrancy was fundamental, because the more vibrant, the more connections, and the more people will look out for one another. And in our hour of need, that's the most important thing. Okay, so what are we doing on my property? So the tagline is 4 homes, 4 families, 40 trees. So we're really trying to make a statement, to stamp that you do not have to sacrifice your beautiful home, your gorgeous trees, and your wonderful gardens to get a return on investment. I'm not for a moment saying don't develop. I'm not saying that. We actually do need to do good, clever infill. Otherwise, we just keep sprawling, destroying beautiful bushland, having ever farther flung suburbs, which has very little sustainability to it. So we need infill, but we need smart and clever infill. So how are we doing that? So we maintain the existing home. That's really important. Our home is 70 years old. It's got massive amounts of embodied carbon. In other words, the timber, the steel, the Peter Pan clay tiles, all of that is embodied carbon. Why destroy that to build a new home? That just needs more carbon, more products. So we kept that. We've retrograded that or retrofitted it. We have a granny flat that's existing. We just sold the granny flat to a wonderful lady. So that is a precious part of our build. And then we have the 2 separate new apartments, which what you can see here. So there's the 2 eco apartments that we're building. And I'll show you how it all fits in. Woodsy, if I can get you to have a look. So this is a side view, and unfortunately, the beautiful architect, well, he is kind of beautiful in a ruggedly handsome kind of way. Matty Warwick, who's the architect for this build from Ecotecture, can't be here tonight. But what you can see through this design, we're actually filming in here tonight. That's our beautiful office. And that's the existing home, which has always been, as I said, 70 or 80 years old. There's our gorgeous jacaranda, the showpiece. There's our granny flat. And here's the 2 new eco apartments that we're building. Now, all of this area shaded in brown, that's what we call common area. 2 really, really important things in relation to this development. That really important. If you want to unshackle yourself from the Titanic, which is the big McMansions, there's 2 really important things you need to remember. Number 1, build small. Small is beautiful. There you go, fellas. Small is beautiful. Large numbers of people, as I said, 70% of the housing demand is not for big houses. It's for small apartments. Be brave and recognize that there is a demand for small apartments. So we built small. The ground floor apartment is 55 square meters in size. So again, that sort of typical modern European style. And the upstairs apartment, which is 1 bedroom, is 45 square meters. And then here's the real kicker. The parking is out the front. God forbid we have to walk 20 meters to our house. So by making the parking out the front allowed us to not lose all of that land to parking. And I'll have some more designs to show this in a bit more detail soon. But very importantly, what we now have is all of this is common area. That's the trees, that's the garden, that's the chooks, the trampoline, all of that stuff. And each one of these houses has its own separate private space. That's really important. We know that West Australians desperately value their private space so they can do nude yoga or whatever it is that they want to do. So you've got to have your own private space. That's cool. But then you walk through the gate and you have a beautiful shared space. So you have the best of both worlds, private, and then a shared space. And that is not new. The best communities in the world have been doing this for hundreds of years. The important thing is it's very new to Western Australia, but when you start to do it and you do it well, you can create an incredible new style of development that people are hungry for. So very importantly, again, small is beautiful, smaller apartments, smaller footprint allows us to keep the trees and all those really cool components, and then the parking out the front. Now, this is something, and Melinda will talk more about this. This is not new. And this is within the planning documents. You can do this on your property. There's nothing radical that we did. We just had a good planner and we knew how to put forward our case to the council so that we could get approval from the planner. So that's a really important part of this process. Okay, so the 4 dwellings, and that allows us to have this beautiful thing where the trees take center stage. Look at that. There's our beautiful jacaranda with the gardens all around that. So our garden will now change from my private garden to one that's shared with the 4 families, but that's an important evolution. And we're starting to create these spaces where people can enjoy and hang out. So how do we do development and keep the trees? How do we get that balance between development? And again, I stress, we want you to be able to develop. We want you to get a return on investment. We want you to do well out of your development, but at the same time, we want you to recognize that you can have it all, the win-win, the trees and the development. So how do we do it? Well, we don't do this. And this is You know, you could be blindfolded and dumped anywhere in a new suburb in Australia, and you would never know where you were. You could say, well, I don't even know if I'm in what state I'm in, because the housing all looks the same. It's vanilla. It's the way we roll it out. And it's great for the developers because they just have a simple model and it's nice and quick, and they roll it out, and you are just part of a big sausage factory. I'm sorry, but that's what happens with the typical modern build. It's not designed for nuance. It's not designed for quality. It's designed for quantity. And the bigger it is, the better, because big houses mean more input of products and more builders and more labor. And so it's a very seductive thing to build big houses. But again, when you have a look at this house on the screen, well, you know, where are kids going to go? Where's the imagination? Where's the mystery? Where's the opportunity for risk and excitement in a garden like that? The only thing that it has, which is in its favor, is it's got a white roof and it has real turf instead of artificial, but that's pretty small. Okay, people often fear trees, tree phobia. And I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that whenever we have a storm, and hopefully we get some storms soon with some rain, I'm saying that to the weather gods. We keep being promised rain this week and not much is happening. But when we've had a big storm in Western Australia, what's the iconic image that they show of the fury of the storm? It's a tree blown over, smashed through the power lines, and God forbid it's hit the BMW or the Tesla. So we have this fear of trees, and we believe that trees are going to damage and cause problems. The reality is we always fall back on the most important mantra. You put the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. You think about your trees. So this gorgeous picture, which is taken at the Christchurch Arboretum, or what's the word I'm looking for? Community garden. Now that's a gorgeous Australian tree. That's a mountain ash. Now that is a big tree. And admittedly, that's not really going to fit in any West Australian garden. But the point I'm trying to make is that we assume all trees are enormous, and nothing is further from the truth. I'm going to show you some slides soon of beautiful species, a list of plants that are small and beautiful. And here's an example. It's not a West Australian tree, but look at that. These are small trees. They've been there for 50 years. They're beautiful, slow-growing European cypress. But the important thing is, look how close they are to the wall. There's no impact on the paving. Again, they've been there for about 45 years. And they fit beautifully in that space. The right plants in the right place for the right reasons. Very, very important. And we need to remember that trees have root systems. That seems like a fairly trite thing to say, but you see all the time, because people don't see the roots, they think they can hack and butcher the soil and the roots, and somehow magically the tree will not be damaged. The reality is it can be, and it will be. And if you've been butchering the tree roots, then that removes, firstly, the strength of the tree, but secondly, the anchoring system for that tree. So it's really important to remember that the canopy, the edge of the canopy of the tree, as you can see there, that's where the bulk of the roots are. So as an absolute minimum, try and do little disturbance under that canopy, because the bulk of the roots will then be protected and enhanced. So if you are looking at your trees and managing them, there's the drip line and the tree protection zone. So the further out that you can go to protect your trees, the better. So when we were putting in the services for our house, keeping in mind we wanted to protect that beautiful tree, we put the trenching as far away from that root, from that edge canopy as we could. And we just said to the people digging the holes for the services, if there's a root bigger than that, just dig underneath it. Try not to destroy those roots. Then we backfilled with compost, wetting agent, and we put beautiful fish and seaweed bacterial brews into the soil to help those roots heal. Because remember, we're trying to protect the integrity of those gorgeous trees so they're strong and healthy. Then you can put a range of permeable surfaces. So these could be the recycled tree mulch, the recycled construction and demolition waste that I talked about before. You can use lawn. You can use a range of perme paving. There's lots of products, but the important thing is, in our gardens, in our landscapes, we want the soil to be permeable so that when we get rain or irrigation, the water goes through into the soil, into that moisture bank. And moisture in the soil is like money in the bank. It allows you to grow things, and in this case, are beautiful trees. So keep that in mind, permeable, so the water is going down into the roots. If we surround the tree with impervious paving, bitumen, pavers, and again, God forbid, artificial turf. It's really starving that plant of moisture, but also oxygen. There's a lot of transference that goes on in oxygen or air going into and out of the soil. So the more permeable, the healthier your plants will be. And if you can, put your house on stumps. If you're trying to protect those beautiful trees, putting your house on stumps means that you can protect and make sure that those gorgeous root systems are not damaged. Stumps have a few issues in relation to passive solar, but you can get around that with a good architect. In other words, putting underfloor insulation, but that will allow you to protect those beautiful tree roots. Okay, so this is looking at my development in a little bit more detail. And let's have a look at how we did this development. Okay, so what we could have done, this is, if we did the old, let's go in and cookie cutter and destroy it and just do the amorphous banal development. What would generally happen is we have the existing site. So you can see here, there's our beautiful tree. Then we got the granny flat, the existing home, and the shed. So that's what we have at the moment. So development option number one, which is sadly the one that a lot of people feel they have to go for, is what we call the battle axe development. So we just put this great big runway development out the back, knock down the tree, of course, knock down the beautiful garden that we had, chooks and kids and all those other wonderful things. And we just plonk the same side of house just at the beginning. Okay, so remember, we can't hear you, but please ask questions. So it's totally cool. Put your questions up. We will hear them and we will be able to answer them. So please keep the questions coming. So that's the typical option. That's called the battle axe development. Okay, option number two is, which is even more ghastly, is where someone says, oh, no, just get rid of that house. Just bulldoze it from one end to the next, smash it all up. We'll get rid of it all for you. And you end up with three or four banal unit developments and lots of concrete, lots of paving, no trees. To the point now where a development like that, if it's really done with very little interest in creating a nourishing development for people, they'll just plonk artificial turf wherever they can. So again, you would be living in a development that you're at the mercy of the hot extremes. There's no gardens, and you fundamentally are unraveling anything good about what could become a nourishing home. So option number three we could have done was to knock down the house and have our parking, and we could have had up to 7 houses on there, which is pretty amazing. So we could have had the two double apartments, and we could have kept the tree and had those other developments. So we chose to keep the house, which is the option we're going to show you in a minute, but it still shows you with a good planner, and getting the right information, you could have lodged this with your council and you would have been getting approval for it. So it's really important to remember what we're doing at our place is not new. It's not radical. It's just that people don't often know that there is this third wave development because we just kept seeing the same message all the time. Build big, bigger houses. And this is the option that we went for. So there you go, our beautiful tree. We've kept the existing home. So we could subdivide within the house. This is really cool. You can now take the structure of your house and subdivide sections within it. So what we're looking to do with my place is there's 2 downstairs bedrooms. We're looking at tweaking that so it becomes its own 1-bedroom apartment, which we can sublet. So we can start to create density and housing diversity without destroying the house that we have. It's pretty amazing stuff. So you've got the 2 apartments that are being built. We got the existing granny flat, and there you go. You can see the parking out the front. It starts to be able to create a beautiful development that is so different what's typically done and provided for us. And very importantly, with our development, you can see our gorgeous jacaranda tree, which is, as I said, the centerpiece. So you can see that we did all of our development and tried to make sure that we did very little damage to the root system of the existing tree. The new development has gone into the wider zone where the roots are, but we did very little excavation. So we think the impact on those trees is going to be minimized. And so far, the tree looks very healthy. Okay, how are you selling the apartments? Great question. We are selling them through what's called built strata. So what that means, built strata is a form of strata development, but it's one that's designed for when you have an existing home. And Melinda will talk more about that. There's survey strata, which most people will know. That's where we have the blank piece of land and the blocks that have been carved up. Built strata gives you more flexibility. It allows you to be able to keep the existing features, the house, and have more nuanced, sophisticated common areas. But there's a few tricks around built strata. So when it means you're doing your builds, you don't get the titles for the new apartments until they're built. That means banks don't like it as much because they basically say, well, there's a gap between when the titles are issued and there's an opportunity where we're building and putting money in and there might be risk. That doesn't mean that you can't get finance for it, but built strata is a really, really important way that we can start to get this done. And will I remain as the strata manager? Short answer is probably yes. I'm going to be living here. So we will have, we have to have a management statement, which is kind of like a book of rules. And it tells the people that are moving into this space that you have your own private space, but you also have a shared space. And we will set a range of nourishing, what we call motherhood requirements living in this space. So for the right people, in other words, people who like this, they're going to go, oh, at last, a place where the trees are going to be protected. There's not going to be people using sprays or doing things that they find really disconcerting or challenging. For some people, they're going to go, oh my God, I couldn't bear to live in that space. And that's fine. So the management statement, in a sense, becomes a gatekeeper, because the other question we get is, how do you make sure you choose the right people? Well, it's always a little bit of a risk, but that's life. Lots of people live in apartments and have some shared area. The important thing is that management statement is really going to vet and screen and largely get rid of those that really would not fit within this type of development into the future. Okay, so when you are trying to keep these beautiful trees in your landscape, and again, I want to reach a stage where our developers, our planners are really looking at doing everything they can to protect those trees in those spaces. So as I said, try and control the traffic under the trees. Remember that compaction under the roots, under the canopy of the tree, can cause massive damage. Try and fence out those trees. Talking to L&B Tree Farm, one of my favorite providers of advanced trees, they said they get a lot of problems where people are just even dumping their coffee grinds or their chalk milk excess around the base of those trees. And even things like that can cause pollution for those trees. But if you fence out the tree, it stops people nicking the tree, as in banging up against it and damaging the bark or parking under there or dumping stuff. So a lot of people who are on building sites don't necessarily love your trees, so fence them out to protect them. Wherever you can, you do tunneling rather than trenching. So trenching is where we just go in and cut all those roots. You can now get tunneling services. They do it all the time. They tunnel under roads, they tunnel under sophisticated optic fiber cables. So it's not a new thing. You can get it done, and it allows you to protect those trees. And wherever you can, if you know your root systems are in spaces and you're going to have to keep going over them, try and protect them. So what we did to protect our trees is we put a bridge of mulch over the top to just reduce the impacts of compaction. And I'm going to show you now some of the ways you can bring your trees back to life with tree pills. I kid you not. Check these next images up. So this is done by a fantastic organization called Arbor Carbon. So they're an amazing organization that really help look after beautiful trees. So if you have gorgeous trees on your property and you want to look after them, or they're not looking all that well, if you get Arbor Carbon to come out, they are basically like tree pathologists. They understand and can help you. And what they've done, that's the same tree. They've then injected this tree with multivitamin pills, essentially. And look at the recovery of those trees. Look at that. That's the same tree. Look at the recovery when good doctors of plants understand the tree and give you these techniques to protect those trees. Very, very important stuff. Okay, so here's some lists to help you to create a garden where the garden is the biggest room of your home. It's this powerful, precious way that the right plants in the right place for the right reasons can help you to create this beautiful space for your plants. So these are what we call the evergreens. So an evergreen is a tree that never loses its leaves, unlike deciduous, which I'm going to show you soon. So these are smaller trees that will fit within your landscapes. Look at them. There's some beautiful Theogonus, that's peppermints. There's some beautiful varieties of that. Lots of gorgeous grevilleas now. And these hybrids, many of them will flower for 10 to 11 months of the year. So they've been designed to be showpieces in the garden. The beautiful dwarf corymbias, that's the red flowering gums. Man, these are just beautiful trees. Some of my favorites coming up, Eucalyptus vitrix, which is the dwarf ghost gum. Now, many of these trees come from the arid interior of Australia. So that means you bring them to South Perth and it's like a permanent Kentucky tour. It's so much easier for those plants. So they will survive and thrive on pretty much no follow-on watering, which is pretty amazing. So these are super tough plants. Some amazing ones in there, the silver princess. Some of the casuarinas are really good. They can be quite narrow. And then I've got down the bottom there, the syzygiums, otherwise known as the lily pillies. There are some incredible lily pillies that have been bred to basically just have this apical shape. So apical means that they grow more this way rather than that way. So that allows you to create a space where down narrow driveways or where you have a small courtyard, you can create these beautiful spaces and have these gorgeous trees. Citrus down the bottom, there are dwarf varieties of citrus now, beautiful stuff. Remember, nurseries are responding to the fact that gardens have got smaller. So you're getting more and more smaller hybridized cultivars. Cultivar means cultivated variety that is designed to work in these smaller spaces. Okay, and here's a list for those narrow areas. Again, down the driveway, down a small section where you just think, what else do I put in that space? These are all plants that will do well in these narrow spaces. Again, these are what we call apical. So good nurseries, L&B Tree Farm is a fantastic place to get advanced trees. I get a lot of my plants from either Dawson's, if I'm getting smaller amounts, or from Domus, Banara, Plant Right, Trillion Trees, Apace. They all have wonderful suites of plants for you, beautiful nurseries that will be able to give you great numbers of plants. So the City of South Perth has a fantastic list, which you can get online, of beautiful locally endemic species, and it will have also some of those nurseries. So I mentioned them again: Apace, Trillion Trees, Australian Native Nurseries, Karamar. They're all wonderful nurseries that have the most incredible array of plants. And remember, 80% of the tourists, when they used to come to WA, 80% of the tourists that come to Western Australia, and we're one of the most popular places in the world to travel, 80% of those tourists would say that they were flocking to us, not to see our football teams, not to see our sprawling, banal suburbs, but to come and see the most incredible plants that are found pretty much nowhere else on the planet. And we can grow them in our gardens, and they're super tough, and they will bring your gardens alive. So these are just a small selection of those. And one of the workshops coming up soon in this series will go into this in a lot more detail. And then these are some of the deciduous trees. Beautiful. I grew up in Canada as a boy, and I still have etched into my memory the first of those beautiful autumn periods where the plants lose all their leaves. We can have some beautiful deciduous trees in WA. And the beauty of this is that you put them between the northeast and the northwest of your property, and they will let in the winter sun and shut out the summer sun. And David Bayer is going to talk more about this evening in his section. He's going to do a crash course on passive solar design, some of the principles of creating a beautiful, comfortable, energy efficient home. Look at all these beautiful plants. One of my favorites up the top, Gleditsia, otherwise known as the honey locust. I love these trees. They lose their leaves by the end of June, so they're completely bare, so that winter sun can flood your house. And then they get a burst of bright yellow leaves when they're coming back into leaf in late October. So you get essentially two bursts of beautiful color in those plants. Chinese elm, Chinese pistachio, gorgeous plants, such beautiful, intense burnt orange when they lose their leaves. The crepe myrtles are magnificent. Keep in mind when you're getting plants for South Perth deciduous, this is really important. You need to remember that we live in a low chill environment, which means you need to ask for low chill variety deciduous plants, because deciduous plants, their whole mechanism is basically governed by how many what we call chilling hours. Now, a chilling hour is below 7.2 degrees. Okay, so that's a good cold winter's night in Perth. Now, compared to places like Carragullen or down south Fridgetown or Wandering, which are what we call medium chill areas, we get very little chill in Perth, which means a lot of the beautiful deciduous trees just won't do well here. This is why you'll never see cherry trees in Perth. because they just need much colder conditions than we get. That's not to say you can't get deciduous trees. You just need to make sure you go to a good nursery like L&B Tree Farm, as I said, or Dawson's, where they have really good staff, so that you'll be able to get those low chill varieties. And then you can put them and they will be such an extraordinary component of how to live well for you in your space. All right, I've banged on about all the hippie stuff, the environmental and the social benefits. Well, what about the economic benefits where the rubber really hits the road? How do we know that our development is going to be doing well? Okay, so this comes from a bona fide real estate agent, Chiara Pacifici. She's a fantastic real estate agent. And this is her information, which is really, really important. So this is her critical analysis of the benefits of having trees on properties that are on the market for sale and how they compare to the big treeless McMansion. So some really, really important things. What she has been able to say is that when you have a good real estate agent who understands those benefits, there is no doubt that a well-designed home and garden, where you have that beautiful blending of a energy efficient home and gorgeous landscaping with beautiful trees, those houses will sell quicker and at a premium. They'll sell quicker and at a premium. So in other words, they are now being seen by a discerning buyer as something that is highly sought after, and you will get more for it. Very, very important stuff. So I've sold 2 houses where we've done a lot of energy efficiency and retained the trees, and that definitely is the case for us. We sold them quickly and at a premium price. And have a look at this. Look at the benefits of those beautiful trees. And again, I was, as I said, driving through Nedlands today, and you get these gorgeous canopies of trees. They are the salubrious leafy green suburbs, which people are going for. And have a look at this here. So an ACOM report found that 10% increase in the size of the canopy across the suburb showed an increase in the value of the property by 7.7%. Okay, so the trees are definitely increasing the value of the property. So this is across Australia. So this is an independent study, yes. So we're going to have our next presenter coming very soon. But the important thing I wanted to say is that there is no doubt that these trees will make a massive difference to us and the ability for us to be able to do the developments we need in the spaces that we have. That's very, very important stuff. So it's nearly 7 p.m. We'll have a quick break while we're waiting for our next developer. So this might be, our next presenter. So that's Melinda, who's going to be coming and giving a talk for us on planning and all of those different aspects. So just a couple of things before we finish up. And Melinda's here now. Okay, she's here. So bear with me a sec. Okay, hi, come in. So we're ready for you. So Chris will just set you up. Do you need the mic off me? Okay. Yeah. So if we just have a quick 2-minute loo stop. So just go and quickly go to the loo and we'll swap over. So our next speaker is the wonderful Melinda Marshall. As I said, she's going to be our fantastic planner who's going to talk you through some of the key aspects of planning and how you can make the things we've talked about a reality. The most important thing I'm trying to stress is that with a good planner, you can make these things happen. Thanks.
Town planning is probably like the boring side of this type of stuff, but it's good to know because it does come in handy if you want to try and get a tree friendly or a sustainable, a sort of alternative sustainable development approved. So I'll just skip through all the site planning, but the main thing to look at with if you're doing a subdivision is the different types of titles. So we've got a freehold green title and also strata, which I think Chris touched on before with his built strata. So I've just listed there a couple of the main differences between the 2 different types of title. It doesn't really mean a lot, but sometimes those factors do come into play. So it's good to note. Another type of a recently introduced title is community title. And again, that just gives you a few different options as opposed to the other type of titles that are available. So this is just an example of a typical freehold subdivision with the lots. The main factor with freehold is that you need road frontage. So yeah, again, that's something that will come into play when you're looking at the different options for your development. This one here is a survey strata title, and you can see that the main difference there is that even though it's still got 3 lots, they have a common property lot as well. And generally in most typical developments, that is a driveway. So I think I've got an example of Chris's later on, which shows you how the common property can actually be a shared garden or, you know, another shared space. This one here is a built strata. So you can see that it's actually got building footprints in addition to the lots, and that's what Chris was referring to with his, where the buildings are built first and then the subdivision is done after. This is just showing a couple of examples of how you could do subdivision designs. Again, these are very typical, where you've got your driveway down the side and then the parent lot is subdivided into 3. And in this example, it just shows you the 2 options of where they've retained the house with the first one. And in the right-hand side, they're demoing the house and doing the 3 lots that way. Another, if you're looking at doing development, another instrumental document is the residential design codes. They have most of the factors that will determine your design and the layout of your subdivision, they include setbacks and height provisions, etc. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about, which can provide a lot of opportunity and flexibility with your development, is the use of special purpose dwellings, which is they're known as ancillary dwellings, and there's also aged independent person dwellings, and also single bedroom, and they just give you a little bit more flexibility. For example, with his 2 apartments, they're actually single bedroom dwellings, which means we've been able to fit some more dwellings on the property than normally would be able to be done because of the single bedroom dwelling provision. So again, when you're looking at doing a development, the other key documents to refer to are the local government planning scheme and also the local government planning policies. I know that the City of Stirling have quite a comprehensive tree preservation policy, so it's good to have a look at that when you're doing your design to see how you can factor in those requirements. I'll just skip through that, so here's an example of how you can do things a little bit differently in order to retain trees and also sort of reduce reliance on paving and car parking. So you can see with this aerial here, they have 2 significant trees at the rear of the property. And so they're designed a little bit differently, where the 3 houses are side by side, and that's mean that they've been able to keep those trees in the backyard, and all the parking is maintained at the front. Here's another example where you can see there's lots of significant trees on the property. And part of the reason that they've able to do that in comparison with all the other development that's around them is because they've kept the parking to the front of the property. They haven't lost a lot of the open space area to a long driveway down the side, which is typical of all the other development around it. Here is another example, which is a little quite a different shaped subdivision, which you would normally typically see. And that was, again, primarily to retain some of the existing trees. With this design, they've kept the parking to the front, which is it's like a shared parking space, and then access through to the rear. So it's something to consider, is that you don't always need to do a development that has a long driveway down the side. You can have different configurations. Here's another example where the properties have been aligned on the dwellings have been aligned on the property quite differently to a lot of the other development around the area, because they've been designed for solar passive properties, so orientated north to catch all the winter sun, so that they get that passive heating in winter. And they also have, again, with typical to the other examples I've shown you, all the parking at the front, so that a lot of the open space is not lost to driveways and car parking spaces. This is a very similar example. The three houses the three buildings are orientated to maximize the solar passive design, and the parking is sort of on the periphery. And again, this is another example, something a little bit different to what you would normally see. You would normally see, if this was a quadruplex development, you would have the houses sort of in a row down one side and very long driveway. Here they've done things a little bit differently, where they've put the parking on either end. They've actually got a rear laneway, which means that they can get vehicle access from both the north and the south. And then they've pushed the buildings to each corner, so that they maximise the amount of open space. And that open space in the middle is going to be a productive garden for the whole community. Here's another example. You can see how leafy and tree lined this property is, because again they've relegated parking to the edges, even though they still have driveways that go through the property in order to access each of the dwellings. It's not a priority, so the trees are given the priority within this development. Yeah, I think I'll just skip through on these. These are just a couple of examples of how you could lay out a design. So yeah, we'll just go to David if he's not here yet. You want to?
That was officially 10 minutes. You were very quick.
Oh, okay. I don't know if there's any questions. I could.
So if we talk a little bit about so the development from my place here. So can you talk a little bit about the steps that we had to go through with the council to get the approval? So for my place, again, the 2 apartments. So the lot size was really, can you talk a little bit through that process to get that approval for us on our place?
Yeah, I guess, you know, because it is something that's a little bit unusual. We weren't just doing the tick box approach. We did go have a meeting with the key planners to start with, just to run past our ideas. And
why is that important to do that?
You know, because to explain what you're trying to achieve. I mean, whenever a planner is looking at assessing an application and deciding on whether to approve it as it is, they need to understand what you're trying to achieve. And I think the fact that, you know, what you're trying to achieve with this sort of mini community and a very sustainable design, you know, there was lots of benefits that they could support, and it was about explaining that, telling the story to them. So, and
as a planner, and knowing how planners work within councils, they've got massive amounts of work on, so putting a face to the name, that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the humanising of it, because I think a lot of the time too with local government planners, they tend to deal with developers who are in it for making money, so it can be quite often quite strange for them to have a non-typical developer like yourself that wants to come along and do something differently. You know, they have to approach it a little bit differently as well. And I remember one of the planners from Coburn talked to us and said they really, as planners, they don't want the same rollout of stuff. And I almost got the impression that they feel like developers are just one step ahead of them and are really trying to bend the system away from what was the original intent. So being able to show a developer that the planners that you want to do something different and better can often work in your favor. Is that right? Yeah, I mean, they often don't see good development, so it's if it's unfamiliar for them, I think they need to have a bit of an education about it sometimes.
And I explained before you came on air that a good planner is like a good lawyer. So how important is it for you as a planner to be able to understand the quirks of each council's, their planning policy? How important is that to get a handle on that when you're helping a would-be developer? And
yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing with the planning system, especially in WA, is it is so complex. Every local government has their own policies, and the town planning scheme has its nuances, and so it can be very, very difficult for a lay person to navigate, which is why getting a planner involved from the get-go can be really helpful, because whilst there might be some requirements, policies that can be done in one suburb, the next suburb over might have something completely different. So yeah, it does pay to ask an expert.
So in terms of South Perth, is there anything that you see in their planning codes that's interesting or people need to be aware of?
No, actually, there's nothing in City of South Perth that is odd that would catch people unawares. So no, I mean, I think it's great that they've got the tree policy to guide to decision making about tree retention and where trees should be planted, because they are, as you know, they're very complicated things, and to have that guidance is beneficial.
So have you done work in South Perth before and had a look at, so in terms of as a council to deal with? So I'm thinking a lot of our people listening tonight are South Perth residents, so they're thinking, oh my God, am I going into the bear pit here when I go to see council? It doesn't have to be that way, does it?
No, look, there are some nuances which are typical for most local governments, in that generally if you walk in and you speak to what they call a duty planner or whoever's on the desk that day, they might not be that very experienced and have all the answers. So it does pay to try and fill out who the best person to speak to at the council would be regarding your development, your situation, someone who has experience and knowledge of your type of development.
And I know that's come up a few times where a junior planner has just sort of wanted to tick a box, and if you take that as the end result, it's not always the case.
No. Again, because it's so complicated, a lot of time planners that don't have a lot of experience, it's hard for them to look at the nuances of something that can go yes or no, because again, this is the thing with planning. There is different approaches to getting approvals. You can do what I call a tick box approach, which is like if your setback is this much, you get a tick for that. But it doesn't mean that you can't do something that varies that, especially if it has a lot of benefit. And there's generally a lot of reasons and objectives and things behind that not all planners and especially if they don't have a lot of experience will understand.
And that magical word precedence, which is so important, it's with law, but it's also with planning. So you were able, can you give us any examples of where you've been able to use precedence to be able to change an original decision so that you get the planning result that you want?
Heaps of them. And this is why what you're doing is so great, because you're showing an example that can then be reflected on later with some, with another decision, and go, look, hang on a sec, it doesn't need to be like this. Look at this happened, and it was great outcomes. The sky didn't fall in, and all that type of thing. So it happens all the time. And
I love that. And there's also, people don't know, there's egos in councils too. So you can almost go, well, they did this in Coburn, so how come South Perth isn't doing it? Particularly when because all councils are trying to move towards more sustainability, and it can be just a glossy document or it can be real. And so when you can show that precedent, it makes it harder for them to knock you back, because then they're just going, well, we couldn't be bothered really, because if Coburn's done it.
I mean, a lot of the time it's an idea they just haven't thought of, so
So I know when we were doing this, we took in some artist impression drawings and some sketches. So anything that's important too, isn't it? To just try and give them some ideas. And even if it means taking in an example of, what's been done here. So you can say, well, look, this has been done in Coburn. How come we can't do it there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a great example with yours is the fact that you've got your parking in the front verge. And I think most councils would be scared about that because of, you know, them thinking it's going to be very bitumised, it's going to be, you know, lots of hard surface. You've got lots of lovely vegetation and trees in the front already, so they'd be concerned about loss of that. But I think once you had that artist impression, and you could show, especially because you're doing the permeable parking as well, so it's not the hard surfaces that they envision. So again, this is what I'm saying about they might be a requirement of no parking in the front verge, but that's because the worst case scenario of having a you know, something that's ugly and bitumised and contributes to the heat island effect.
And we did get approval from Coburn to do that semi-permeable paving. So we talked a little bit about this before. So we're using the crushed recycled bricks. So we're going to allow the water through. It's cooler, so it really can fit within that space. Do you want to explain to people a little bit about the R codes? Because I don't think that's that could be really interesting for people to know about that one.
Yeah, so the R codes are a state planning document, the main planning document that guides as far as setbacks and overshadowing and privacy provisions and all that. And that's generally why you do get the cookie cutter look of a lot of dwellings around, is because they're basically just complying with the tick box approach with the R codes. But the R codes also do have a sort of a what they call the design principles approach, where you know, you can demonstrate a different way of doing things that's still going to have a good outcome, and you can get an approval that way. So yeah, it's sort of the main planning document when it comes to residential design.
So the R, that stands for the number of residences you're allowed per hectare. So R20 is 20 houses density per hectare.
Correct.
R30 is 30 houses per hectare. R40, R60. So you can see as the R rating goes higher, there's the potential for more homes and the potential for more incentive to just clear everything if you're not careful.
Yeah. So and because single story development is the cheapest form of construction, you'll find even in sort of high density areas where you could probably put some apartments if it's in a walkable area with good public transport. A lot of people will just do villas, and that means just clearing everything on the site and being wall to wall concrete.
And I love, if we have a look at here, so with our development there, so explain what I loved about this with Coburn, and I don't know if it was intentional, but giving it R30/40 gave us the incentive, and it gives councils a lot of power, because if you just want to do a tick box, which is your cookie cutter kind of ho-hum, you'll only be given R30. But if you want to push the boundaries, do something innovative, it gives them the power to go, well, if you want to do something better, which is more sustainable and really pushing us in the right direction, we'll give you that lot.
Yeah, like you said, it's an incentive. So in order to try and encourage better development, you can potentially get another dwelling on the property, but it means that you have to do these things that the government, that the local government feels is beneficial to the wider community or to the actual design. So yeah,
that's a big part of it. Now, can we go into the lot ratios a little bit about how that works? So some of the calculations you as a planner would work on. So can you explain a little bit about how that process works in terms of how you can get the lots on the property?
Yeah, I mean, the general basic, when a developer's looking at a property to develop, they're going to do the back of envelope calculation of this is the minimum lot size, this is the main lot size, and I can fit this many lots into this property. There's going to be some variations, but that's generally how it basically works.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer this question?
Yeah, please do. Yep.
So there's a question about what power does the Planning Commission have on local development? And yeah, they have power in a few different places, depending on a couple of different factors. The main one would be they're the ultimate decision-making body when it comes to what a local government's planning scheme and policies will look like. So that the local government will come up with all the different rules and regulations. but it will be the planning commission has the final say.
And that's the state government agency.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. They also have powers with regards to certain types of developments, subdivision, the main approval authority as well.
And so they basically administer SAT as well.
The state government, not the
Yes.
planning commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you want to explain, so some people would know about what that is, SAT.
State Administrative Tribunal. Yeah. If anything, if the planning process is not going according to plan,
Yeah.
there is an option of going to the State Administrative Tribunal and getting a legal decision on the outcome.
So if the council's not, so if you just feel like they're not supporting something sustainable, you can actually appeal to the State Administrative
Yeah, if you think the
Tribunal.
reasons that they've refused your application for whatever reason you don't agree with it, then there's that option as well.
Yeah. So sadly, it's often used when local government wants to do the right thing and a big developer uses it as a way to try to push out.
Yes,
sadly.
more often than not.
Yeah, which is a bit sad. It's not.
Yeah,
it's kind of not the way we really want it to go. So, okay, so if I'm a South Perth resident and I have a property and the zoning has changed, so what is there a suite of zoning varieties in South Perth? So, what's the typical zoning of South Perth, do you think?
Oh, well, it varies quite a lot because you obviously got the high density areas of South Perth proper, and then the suburbs as well. So, and then within those suburbs too, there'll be spots that are close to shops and things that will tend to have a higher density.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know off the top of my head all the different
if I'm living
places and zones, but yeah.
So if I want to find this information out, so I want to know what the zoning is for my piece of land, what do I do?
Yeah, well, most local governments will have a mapping portal on their website.
Okay.
So Intramaps, and they can just go on there, search their property, and it will come up with the zoning of their property and probably what other policies and things that apply as well.
Okay.
Generally.
So if typically a lot of places, if it's the burbs of South Perth or what are the other councils are, it's probably going to be R20.
That's most common. Suburban density is R20.
But there's still options to do some clever infill development with R20, isn't there?
Depending on the size of the property. One thing, most people these days don't realise that they can actually get a granny flat on a property. You only need a minimum lot size of 350 square metres.
Okay.
So any property that has a lot that big can have a granny flat.
Okay. And so that's the ancillary dwelling?
Correct.
Okay. And that's generally now has to be 100 square metres?
No, 70.
70, but it can go up to 100. Is that right? Where's the 100
The 100 comes into play when you're doing a age-dependent person development.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can have your lovely garden and your trees, and you can still do put a 70 square metre granny ancillary dwelling.
Yep. And
the parking could be out the front. So people can walk through. So what's the requirements for that access then? It doesn't have to be a driveway. So what's required for that access?
If it's just pedestrian access, and 1.5 meters should be sufficient to get down there. Yeah, there's nothing to say that you need a driveway to get to a dwelling. That's a common misconception.
And that's worth saying again, because it's so important, isn't it? There is no requirement for you to have driveway.
Yeah, I don't know if you've showed them the lot layout for yours, but yeah, you have no driveway going to the dwellings. So
it's amazing. And so that's what we've done here. And we've got a lady who's 81 who's moved into our granny flat. And we have to provide her with universal access. So here's what her journey is every day. So she is down here. So this is all paved, 1.5 meters wide, crushed recycled material. So she can walk up through to here. And that's certainly common. And you're working on a few developments that are looking at that sort of thing, aren't you?
Yeah. Whenever someone comes to me and asks me about what the options are, I definitely don't do the typical designs of the driveways. I try to show them stuff that's a little bit outside the box to maximise what they're trying to achieve. I think that's the other thing too.
Yes.
Is a lot of people don't realise what can be done. So you ask them, what do they want to achieve? Is it to build another house for their children, or is it that whatever that they want to achieve, and then you can work around it. Generally, it's not to put a driveway down the side.
No. And a little bit about transport. So obviously and we touched a little bit on this, we're a very car dependent society here. So from a planner's perspective, and looking broader scale, what are some of the things we can do to make Perth a more orientated to more sustainable transport options, which are public transport, cycleways? What's some of the things we can do, bigger picture in WA?
Yeah, look, I think the missing link for us as a very car dependent society. So you've got obviously walking, and cycling, which is the most sustainable types of transport. And then you've got public transport, and then you've got your car. And there's actually a big gap between public transport and having your own car,
right?
Which is where I think car sharing fills the gap, and it's very popular over east and lots of other countries around the world, but we just don't have that here. So I think if there's a development that incorporates car sharing, which again is something you can minimize the amount of parking that you have to provide on site because you've got a share car as part of the development, that helps bridge the gap between having to own a car that's there all the time to use the bus or cycling or walking as well.
So the time will come where you'll be able to justify to a council, we need less parking bays because we have a share car.
Correct.
So I know for our development, I keep holding it up again. So for our council, they said we have to have 1 car bay per dwelling, which meant 4 car bays. Can you explain a little bit like how that can be reduced if you're near high transit public transport?
Yeah, so one of the features of the R codes, and I mean with the R codes, they can be varied by local government policy, but generally most of them have the requirement where you need a certain number of bays in an area, and then if you're close to public transport, you can reduce the number of bays.
Right. And that's the frequency. I know we were told that if we had a bus that was every 15 minutes, we could have gone to 0.75 car bays, which would have meant 3 car bays rather than 4.
Yeah.
So and that kind of makes sense. So if we look from a broader perspective, that's why a lot of the new sustainable developments, they have at the heart good public transport. And that's what they do in Europe, isn't it? And the modern Asian cities, they build around a public transport hub. So that allows people to live without cars. They can cycle, they can ride, and of course use really good public transport.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, most trips can be done using a bike or or just walking, and it's really the trip to Bunnings or the trip grocery shopping and things that you occasionally need the car for. So it'd be great to have one there when you need it, but you don't actually have to maintain it or pay for all the rego and all that type of thing. So car sharing is really good.
And I know for our development, so we'll aim to have battery storage solar, which will allow us to have a charging station either for a bike and or a car. So that's going to be more common into the future, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's another development I'm working on at the moment with that same philosophy. They'll probably have a car share and solar panels and all this stuff that goes with it.
All the bells and whistles. Thank you. That's awesome. And it sheds a bit of light onto that arcane world of planning. But most importantly, I think the take-home message is you can do so much more with your property than you thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's and again, why it's good to show off what you're doing, because a lot until people see it, they don't realize it can be done. So just if you've got an idea, don't be afraid to explore it just because you haven't seen it somewhere else.
Exactly. And that's where the great change occurs. And again, we're going to see more and more of that happening into the future with developments. My computer gets very antsy if it doesn't keep moving, gets bored. Okay, we're going to have a break very soon. So we've got our poll questions. Is that right, Mr. Woods?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
People can fill it out.
Okay. So we're going to have a break. So this is a great chance to come in and have a cuppa, grab something to eat, And we're coming back at 8 o'clock with our wonderful David Bayer. So he's going to be talking about, as we said, sustainable development. So what are the key principles of passive solar? He's going to show you the developments he's done on his property. Then we'll have a bit of a Q&A. So we'll wrap up with some of those really important questions that you have, really tying it all together so we can really look at reimagined cities and suburbs and homes into the future. So have a break. Please fill out that evaluation. That's really important for us. It allows the City of South Perth to see the value and what's going on and what's the feedback. So it's a really important way for us to make sure we can justify that these are important strategies, and it helps us to make sure we change and shape the events moving forward to meet those demands and needs. So we'll see you back very soon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a bit of a break. I hope you've been able to process everything that we've talked about. So again, this whole session is about reimagining the future and looking, as Western Australia is, at a tougher climate moving forward. We're having to grapple with climate change, the impacts of COVID. Now more than ever, we need to build more resilient homes and communities. So we've been talking so far about some of the ways that we can design our suburbs where we don't have to destroy everything in the pursuit of high density and a return on investment. We've shown how we can protect, enhance, and even integrate more trees into our suburbs. And we've had a bit of a view into planning and how planning doesn't have to be the stone wall to stop development. In actual fact, if we do it well, planning can lift the lid on that and give you lots of opportunities to do developments where you do smaller developments and you have the parking out the front. And this next section with the amazing David Bayer is really going to talk about some of the key principles of passive solar design. So how we can actually build and or retrofit our homes so it can become more naturally comfortable. If you've never been in a passive solar home, you really don't know what you're missing. It's extraordinary to come into a house that is naturally cool in summer and beautiful and warm in winter. There's something magical about it. And it doesn't have to be something that only happens in those hippie fringe homes. This should be front and center. So David will talk about some of that. And as a developer and builder in his own right, he's going to show you some of the amazing things he's done on his property. So here he is in all his glory, the great David Bayer, who, as I said, is really a proud professional in this space and has had lots of experience at designing properties, but also looking at how we can make our developments more energy efficient, but looking at all the other aspects as well at what makes a truly sustainable home.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Chris. And
pleasure.
Hi, everybody out there in technology land. So yeah, as Chris said, I'm going to start on just looking at some fundamentals of solar passive design and how that links in with the importance of landscape, and indeed how landscape in the wrong place can be an impediment. But in case of one of my examples, how I've actually worked with that, what might be seen as an impediment. I'm a sustainability consultant. So whilst I'm talking today about local infill developments, single lots, if you like, I also do a lot of work with state government and local governments, as well as with the land development sector. So land developers are looking at how they can apply these principles across multitude of lots and indeed apply the right set of design criteria so every dwelling that's built on those lots achieves some meaningful outcomes. And they're, if you like, starting from a blank canvas. But at this point, and I imagine where most of you are living in the South Perth area, you're living in very existing areas with lots of existing trees. So let's get started. Building design and trees. So this diagram shows the absolute fundamentals of solar passive design. You always have to know where the sun rises, the sun sets, and more specifically where north is. Indeed, my wife is very onto this now. Before, when we first met over 20 years ago, she goes, I've never even thought in my life where north is, and everywhere she walks now, she's always orienting herself to the north, especially when she visits somebody else's home. She's making a very quick assessment on their solar access potential. So the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. As the diagram's showing in summer, and what we're just coming out of, the sun pretty much goes straight overhead, which means in the morning, any wall that is facing east gets a huge heat load over it. The roof gets a lot of summer sun on it, and then the afternoon summer sun on the western wall gets a heat load. That's important, but what's most important is that the Earth's axis tilts, as we know, which means that the winter sun is far more in the north, at about 25 degrees more or less. If you go out onto the north side of the house and put your hand up something like that, that's not a salute, that's just trying to find the angle of the sun, you can actually see where the winter sun at winter solstice would be. We want to aim to get as much of that winter sun into the dwelling as possible, and we want to be able to reduce those summer heat impacts as much as possible as well. So that's done fundamentally through good design, as Chris has mentioned, and then we're dealing with the rest of it mainly through insulation and location of windows and then using vegetation. So here's a simple design showing where north is up the page, and it's showing that the north end of the dwelling, in fact, it's the same as this very room that we're standing in now, gains as much winter sun as possible. It's got trees on the east and west side to protect it. And on the north side, we're going to see deciduous trees. So I'm going to talk more about that. So basically, all of this pergola area and this glazing that you will have on the north side will attract as much winter sun as you possibly can. We want to keep the living areas to the north. They're the rooms that most of the daylight time is spent. And we want to have the bedrooms on the south side of the dwelling, simply because bedrooms are at night time and it doesn't really matter where the sun is at that point. So living rooms to the north side, opening out through the north onto an outdoor pergola area. So a lot of indoor-outdoor access to provide natural ventilation, as well as accessing the garden, provided you've got the right shape orientation of the lot to be able to do that. So living areas, mainly kitchen, dining room, general sitting areas, and then all other areas on the south side of the dwelling. That's the fundamentals of solar passive design. There's a whole lot more to it as well. You can, I have mentioned, and it's not really showing it on this diagram too well, reduce those summer heat impacts on the east and west by putting low use or utility use rooms on the east and west side. So carports or garaging is excellent on the east and west side, as well as storage sheds, bathrooms, storerooms, utility rooms, and the like. You can't achieve that all the time, but as long as those fundamentals of good solar passive design are followed, you can achieve improved outcomes. And here we go with part of the aspect of summer heat loads, and probably what the term here is urban heat island effect. So where we don't have a lot of shade, and yet we've got a lot of car parking, asphalt areas, sometimes concrete paving, as well as lots of cars around, mainly made of metal, we're getting some very, very high heat impacts. And this can be the same on our own residential areas as well. If we provide as much shading as possible, keeps our cars cooler, keeps the whole environment much cooler as well. And the urban heat island impacts are very well understood now. They might not be well understood at the individual lot type level, but they're certainly spoken about at an urban design or a citywide level, and how important it's to do that. And a lot of the research recently has looked at tree canopy cover, and suburbs like where most of you are living in South Perth will have a very good tree canopy cover. Lots of newer areas, it's all roads, it's all roofs, and a lot of those are dark tiled roofs. They can increase the ambient temperature by 6 to 8 degrees. Just the same as walking down St. George's Terrace on a hot summer's day. It can be very, very hot down there. So our landscaping is critically important, and Chris might have spoken about that, and I'll talk more about that on some of my properties. The value of trees is just that. They can be incredibly valuable as well. I was having a conversation earlier today that land developers will talk about if they can maintain any existing trees within street verges, they're seeing a value. In this case, it's pitched at about $18,000 to $20,000. That's the Real Estate Institute study. Trees within lots, especially in newer subdivisions, are seen as something different. But again, in your area, properties with mature trees that are well located and provide a lot of shade, seen as a high value. Further studies, for example, in Melbourne, they've tried to quantify it. Can't probably read it here, but this little formula talks about the base value of a tree, and you can buy mature trees to put in, plus the location of it, plus its aesthetic quality, provide a high return on investment. So in this case, they're quantifying these trees' value at around $150,000. That is certainly depending on the location that it's located in. But whether it's $18,000 or $150,000, trees are incredibly value in terms of an investment. And I would say they're even more value in terms of the shading quality, the aesthetic quality, and the quality of life for us humans, not to mention the intrinsic quality of the tree itself. This is one of our colleagues, well, Matt's sister's house. Matt is our colleague, trying to show here again, north-oriented areas with all of this windows and doors that open onto the north side, well shaded on the north side with eaves to still keep the summer heat load off, but allows the winter sun in, and providing a lot of shade in summer on the north side. And in this case, it's a deciduous tree. So in summer, it's providing shade on the north side. In winter, that deciduous tree loses all its leaves, and that winter sun will shine through the naked tree, if you like, and penetrate into this living area, as well as beneficially heating up this brick paving here to keep the area warmer in winter. Summer comes around again, the tree goes into full bloom, full shade. It keeps heat impacts off these brick paving. It doesn't heat up, and the tree and the eaves shade these northern walls as well. So deciduous trees on the north side. And as I mentioned, we want to reduce east and west heat impacts. So evergreen trees or shrubs on the east and west side, if that's achievable. Here's another one telling a similar story, and this is Matt's house. Again, huge amount of glazing to the north, highlight windows, these triangular windows on the top here as well, providing even more winter sun right into the building. Wide, generally 600mm eaves to provide summer shade, but the winter sun will come in on this approximately 25-degree angle and penetrate right into the building. Open it up on a warm summer's day and you're living outside. So really in Western Australia, and most of you would know this who've been living here for long enough, much of our winter months we can be sitting outside anyway. And if we've got that warm winter sun there, even better. So again, eaves to protect the highlight windows, deciduous tree on the north side, pergola in this case has removable shade cover as well, and there's a whole variety of options that you can have there. On my pergolas, I actually grow a deciduous grapevine over there. So again, loses its leaves in winter and allows full solar penetration into my home. And in this case, Matt's showing that he's got dark colored tiles to soak up and hold the heat, creating thermal mass. Chris, just a time check. How am I going?
We've got plenty of time. Plenty of
time. All right, then I can get on to my properties now. So here's my my personal story and my passion. Now I can talk about this for everything I have achieved, but I can also talk about some of the impediments or the challenges that I've had to deal with. So it's not textbook in a lot of the things that I've spoken about. So here we are, I'm calling it Snook Infill. This one in red is my home property. I moved here in 1997. Hilton was a very different type of suburb then, but it's now become an incredibly beautiful area. And I was attracted to it because, as you can see in this image, it had a whole lot of trees. before Hilton was subdivided with a lot of battle axe subdivisions. And you can see like this house on the north side around, there's a whole lot more houses here now, but there were a lot more trees back then. But nonetheless, it's been a subdivided suburb. And as Chris has mentioned, what he's doing here at Mortlock Street, I didn't want to do a standard battle axe subdivision, partly because of, or mainly because of the vegetation I had on my property and the way the existing houses were configured. But also, other than the environmental design aspects, community and community living is absolutely important to me, my partner, and our family. And a big part of that community living is not just anybody, but a recognition that the largest demographic growth is an aging population, as well as singles and couples. And people finding suitable housing for small, compact families, singles and couples, is very, very difficult. So let's build appropriate studio type dwellings for them. What I want to point out on my properties here is you can see north is pretty much straight up the page. So neither of these properties, and I should mention this is the property next door that I managed to buy 5 years ago. Fantastic to be able to buy a next door property. So we're now combining the two as part of our little snook community. But none of these properties are north facing, as well as the need to deal with a lot of existing vegetation on there and existing dwellings as well. So I put my environmental design skills together and came up with these studios here. This is at the main home property that we built 5-6 years ago. And then a couple of years ago, we built this other studio here. And I'll talk more about those design attributes in a moment. Other than to say right now that these dwellings defy the solar passive design principles of an east-west orientation. Both of them have large east and west walls, and they have smaller northern face living areas. That was based on the constraint of the block. So here we go back again. The main property, it's a north-south facing block. Here's the main house here. We could really only locate a studio in this area, partly because I did not want to destroy the existing vegetation here. And the same with my adjoining property here as well. Existing house, an existing shed here that we wanted to maintain. So the only location for a new studio was here on a north-south axis. And these are the design, I'm going to come back to that. Sorry, this is the plan that we created for the second property. This is the new studio here. So this studio, it's under the new ancillary dwelling policy, or what's commonly known as the granny flat policy. On these lots, which were about 780 square meters, it allowed me to build a 70 square meter studio on each block of land. And 70 doesn't seem very huge, but in the case of this second one here, we've created 3 bedrooms within this space, its own living area, and a really generous outdoor area as well. North is on the angle through here, so we have created as much glazing on this north side as possible, as well as a lot of windows here as well to bring as much winter sun into the property as possible. And we've designed both of them with super insulated walls and wide eaves to reduce that heat impact on the east and west walls. So both of these dwellings that we created, here's a floor plan of them, both of them that we created have achieved a high thermal environmental rating. In other words, they perform very well. And through this last summer, when we've had those extended heat wave days of over 40 degrees for 5, 6, 7 days, this studio here in particular, the second one, as well as the first one we built, they perform very well. Albeit we did have ceiling fans in there to keep the air moving around. But nonetheless, they hold their own in a 40-degree day. Get a bit warm in there for sure, but did pretty well overall. So you can achieve a lot with the fundamentals of solar passive design, as well as really well insulated properties and double glazing. We've put double glazing throughout them as well. Here's an aerial The other pictures I was showing was pre-development. Here's an aerial image of them. So here is the new studio here. Can't quite pick the lot boundary. It looks very crowded, but when you're actually on the property, there's a lot of room in this backyard area here. And here's the second property with the new studio here and a lot of outdoor entertaining here as well, and linking into this backyard space. It's generous space. There's a lot of room there, and we spend a lot of time out in the garden. We're getting a lot of veggies growing in this garden area here as well. I don't think this aerial picture really shows the true amount of space that we've got there. It works well. It's not a subdivided block. We didn't have to take out any trees whatsoever. So we've retained all of that existing vegetation. And here are some images of what it looks like within the garden. A lot of people come around and comment that they feel like they're walking into a bit of a Bali type situation because we've got so much greenery there. Part of the greenery is actually benefiting that we've got grey water systems on both properties. And because we've built these studios, we've now got on this infill one, the home property, we've got 2 bathrooms in the main house. We've got a bathroom in the new studio and 2 washing machines, all feeding into the grey water system and pumping throughout the garden year round. So even though we've got winter rains, grey water in winter is hugely beneficial on a garden. If someone says, is rainwater or grey water better? I'd be saying grey water is a better investment if you can manage the system. So maintained a huge amount of trees here. Indeed, when we're sitting on our back veranda, which is where this photo is taken from, you can see this wall here, but it doesn't feel like you're invaded by this large studio. Here again is the same studio, a lot of vegetation in the backyard. Again, really wide eaves to protect this east-facing wall. This is looking back towards the main house. This is in the middle of winter. So right here, you can hardly see it, but this is a couple of deciduous trees here that provide a huge amount of summer shade, but allow all the winter sun into the property as we're going. A lot of this building as well, just as an aside from the environmental design aspects, lots of recycled timber and recycled materials in here. Whoops, what did I do there? Lots of recycled jarrah. We've included double glazing throughout. You can sort of see down here a lot of winter sun getting into the house, and this is where the tenant dries their clothes. They've got an outside clothesline, but they put them there as well. This is the property next door. Now, what I wanted to point out with this one is this is the northern boundary. We've got these 2 marri trees right on the northern boundary, which from a solar passive design perspective would be seen as disastrous. That's blocking out pretty much all of our winter sun and provides a huge amount of shade in winter as well as in summer. But you can see here, we've got this whole space between the trees where we're getting winter light coming through. So I'll try and find this image here. This is the north face of the wall, and the winter sun is coming in between those 2 marri trees and penetrating this northern end of the dwelling and providing a whole lot of winter light into the dwelling. Indeed, this is inside the dwelling here, and you can see how far the winter sun is penetrating into the building there as well. And this one as well, you can see the sunlight coming right inside the studio. This is a cloudy day, but this still has the winter sun coming in between these marri trees. So it wasn't negotiable. When we bought this property, the marri trees were on the northern boundary. We weren't going to take them down. We spoke to the neighbours and they said, yeah, they're a bit messy. We need to clean up honky nuts all the time, but we love them. And they're the last few within the blocks of land in that area of Hilton that are surviving. So, you know, yeah, like Chris, I'm passionate about the vegetation. I recognise the intrinsic worth of trees. I think they're worth keeping, and you can design around them. You can still get that winter solar access. Going back to the first property, again, this is as we were finishing the construction of it, but you can see the winter solar penetration right into the building here from this glazing here on the north, and also at this upstairs mezzanine area here as well. Again here, showing recycled bricks that we brought into the building. All of these walls were made with bricks that were actually going to be thrown out into landfill from new building sites. Lots of other recycled jarrah throughout this development as well, and different doors that we picked up from Gumtree and Verge throwouts and the like. So you can do lots of fancy things with recycled product and make it look really good as well. Final ones here. This is the front property. We don't have any fence lines between the two properties, but we've got a whole lot of boundary line of fruit trees. So we've got lemons, mandarins, limes and kaffir limes right along this boundary here. And we're filling out the verge area as well with fruit trees as well. Both properties have shared fruit trees that we're aiming to increase, trying to bring as much productive fruit and vegetable growing onto our properties as much as possible. So that's where I've got to. I'm happy to go back and go into any detail with anything and or answer any questions or have a discussion, or Chris might even have some questions for me.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we can go into a bit more detail about. So the question often is about rainwater, and people
I mentioned rainwater, grey water.
Yeah. So people often think I'll get rainwater for the garden, but the big shock for people is that it always shocks people. You say, well, if you get a 2,000 litre rainwater tank, which is probably a good size for an urban block, when you put on a normal irrigation cycle, you're going to use around 1,500 litres of water just for one day's irrigation. So that 2,000 litre rainwater tank might last you one irrigation cycle. So what do we use that beautiful rainwater for?
Rainwater for. Great question, Chris. And what I'm about to say is not just an opinion. This has been very well documented by research that's been commissioned. Well, one back in the days of the Armidale Redevelopment Authority, they commissioned a huge amount of research into this of what's the best use of rainwater and recycled water in Western Australia. And I think back then the Water Corporation was part of it as well. And for a while, even provided rebates for rainwater tanks. So Western Australia, we generally get rain for about 4 or 5 months of the year. Sometime it creeps into 6 odd rainfalls here and there. But generally, once the rain stops, probably in around September at the latest, those rainwater tanks are going to be sitting empty. And I do have a rainwater tank. It's been empty since September. And I was hoping last week we're going to get some rain, but didn't eventuate. No. So in other words, Chris asked, what do we use rainwater for? Well, if we can keep that rainwater tank topped up with more frequent rainfall like they get in Sydney and Melbourne, then you could use it for a variety of purposes. But in Western Australia, as Chris said, it's pointless putting that rainwater onto irrigation because it'll empty out very quickly. And the tank's only filling up in winter when you don't really need a huge amount of water on your garden anyway. The best use for that rainwater is classified, and this is what the policy says, recycled rainwater is not a private good, it's a public good. In other words, we are taking rainwater and using it for flushing of toilets and using it for laundry as well. And by using it for that in winter is allowing the rainwater to recharge the aquifer, the superficial aquifer on which we all have on the Swan Coastal Plain, but the deeper aquifers as well that we're actually using for increasingly for our water supply, notwithstanding desalinated water. So that sort of answer throws a lot of people out. And I still have people who put a rainwater tank in for watering their gardens and they can't quite work out why it doesn't go very far.
And just to be clear, if you're on 5 acres and you can put 100,000 litre, which is a big tank, fill your boots and you probably will have enough irrigation. And if you've got sheds and a big house on 5 acres, you will fill 100,000 litres and you can use it for irrigation. But we're talking about
Yeah,
South Perth.
South Perth. And I would say on that case, Chris, a lot of those people, and I have friends who were living down on Margaret River on a semi-rural property, they actually did have a big rainwater tank. They weren't going to use it on the garden. On a few fruit trees, yeah, but really mainly they're saving that precious water for laundry as well as toilet flushing and the like. So yeah, this is my response, is that the best recycled water in an urban setting here is to create a grey water system. So,
and we'll talk about that.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
And so on my property here, so we plumbed, we have a 5,000 litre rainwater tank, but we're on a property which is on a bit of a angle. It's on stumps. So the house is here. So we had a beautiful space to put the 5,000 litre rainwater tank. But even though that's 2.5 times the size of what we were talking about, it's still too small for the garden. So that's plumbed into the downstairs toilet and the laundry. So that's beautiful use of that. Okay. So we've had a question, can you drink rainwater if you live near the coast?
You can drink rainwater, yes. In fact, a lot of rural Australia was built on rainwater, if you like. All farms and rural properties lived off the rainwater they could catch. I don't think there's ever been a documented case of anybody being seriously sick or even dying from rainwater.
Yes.
The Department of Health, and I think there's links on the Water Corp's website to this, does show guidelines for using of recycled water. And in the case of rainwater, they're generally saying that if you want to drink rainwater, it needs to go through some form of primary UV filtration to kill off any potential pathogens, but that's highly unlikely. The question is, if you live near the coast, I would say even more so, yes, if you live near the coast, you're going to have a less likelihood of any land-based pollutants or anything like that that might be picked up in the rain. So yes, you can drink it. So the health department says give it a primary filtration.
And we always used to say in our Great Gardens workshops, try and site it on the south side of the house so it's not getting hot. So you're keeping it cool. Obviously, you have a really good cover on it. So that allows you, and ideally just check the roof, the quality of the water coming off. And we talked about a first flush. So I've got that on my place. My gutters are appalling, so I need to get up and clean them.
I've just cleaned mine.
Well done, you.
For all the rain that we were going to have last week.
Imagine if the Bureau got paid for how accurate their forecasting was, they would be less reckless with that icon that shows the rain. For those of us who love rain, we got very excited for nothing.
Yes.
But putting in a first flush, so that means after all that summer, as David said, where you've had a long time without much rain and just probably lots of bird poo on the top, you use that first breaking rain to flush the gutters. So you just have a tap, so it diverts that, cleans the gutters. Then when you've cleaned that off, then after a good few soaking rains, then that beautiful catchment off your roof can work for you. So that's pretty important stuff.
And lots of guidelines, as I mentioned, Water Corp website. And for those who've got pen and paper ready, the Your Home website has an abundance of everything we've been talking about in terms of water reuse as well. So Your Home Technical Manual. And
City of South Perth with their sustainability information will probably have a lot. Then the next one is the grey water. And you talked about that. So grey water, just to be clear for everyone, that's water coming from the laundry and the shower, not the kitchen. And obviously not the toilet.
Not the toilet, which is a kitchen and well, definitely the toilet, but considered black water because of the amount of grease and so on that's in it. Grey water, just generally, well, it's got a bit of hair, a bit of skin, a bit of soap, a bit of lint, nothing that can't be dealt with some very, very basic filtration.
And people, so importantly, on my place, I've had grey water here for 11 years. So we've had a fantastic system. It's called Grey Flow, made by Advanced Wastewater Systems. It's a West Australian company, and they design and export these systems all around the world. Amazing products. And the system I have has no tanks, and it's a self-cleaning system. So it's about the size of a big bloke's esky. So it's about that big, and it sits under, again, my house is on stumps, so it's nicely fits underneath. And it self-cleans, and it basically then just puts it straight out into the garden, about 100 litres per system. So for me, when I had the whole family here, that was about 100,000 litres of water per year,
per year,
free, with
yeah.
nutrients in it to go out into the garden.
Yep.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yep, it is amazing, and I think, you know, from an investment perspective, more or less similar,
Yes.
depending on the type of home that you're living in. But yeah, with grey water, it's all year round, and you can put it on all plants. You cannot put it onto, well, the guidelines say do not put it onto a vegetable garden.
Yes.
But again, that is the Department of Health guidelines being very safely conservative on that. It's probably a smart rule, and you can certainly put it around the root system on your fruit trees as well. The important thing, and again, check out all the guidelines and so on like that, but with existing homes, the challenge is being able to plumb it in to existing pipe work, or in this case, to collect your shower water and your laundry water. A lot of old homes, and I imagine quite a few in South Perth, are on stumps, so you might be able to retrofit those,
which is perfect.
Which is perfect. Same situation with rainwater as well. So yeah, you do need to get an expert in to look at your home, or if you understand it yourself, to see what's possible there. Slight tangent, Chris. I mentioned earlier my work with the land development sector as well. A number of the more innovative land developers are now putting in their design criteria for purchases. They're providing this information when people buy blocks. They're actually providing a rebate to them for new homes if they set up their home to be grey water or rainwater ready, which effectively means they're providing a semi or dual plumbing system where they can connect the grey water into the grey water system and a separate plumbing sewerage system for the black water to be taken off as well. So look, we talk about greening of the urban environment. We talk about tree canopy and vegetation. It thrives on water as well as good soil, good nutrients. But this is the perfect way to give all of that vegetation a really good boost and grow well. And end up with backyards like Chris and I have.
And that's so true. And it's interesting, just recently, the state government is saying that they're going to reduce the water allocation for bores.
Yes, good.
And actually, I agree with it, because we are plundering this precious resource and people are outraged. I get that. But what the Water Corporation need to do is step up the education and provide the opportunities for people to basically replace that precious water that's coming from our aquifers through bores with the grey water. So at the moment, most of that beautiful grey water is just being dumped in the ocean. So we've got this amazing opportunity. When you think of the big recycling triangle, well, on a macro scale, if we talk about reimagining our cities into the future, I remember the former Premier Jeff Gallop saying we need to become the most water efficient society on the planet. And that's absolutely where we need to be. So targeting that grey water is really cool. So we've had a question about the self-watering.
Great. And keep the questions coming, please, folks. Yes, we love questions.
We do. And that grey water system I have is right under the kitchen. And I say to Sam Milani, who designed it and built it and put it in, so he's Advanced Wastewater Systems, fantastic guy, and his amazing systems. It is so quiet. It's quieter than a hairdryer. You don't hear it. And it's right under the kitchen. So if it was going to smell and really stuff up, we'd know straight about it. It's an amazing system. I can't speak more highly of it. The key things we say with grey water is it's only as good as the products you use. So we would always say go with liquids. Liquids have less salts in them than powdered laundry detergents. So liquids, go for the greener ones, EcoStore, Planet Arc. There's some really good products now. So liquids. And the key is anything that says whiteners, that's generally code for bleach. So that means when you're putting that stuff onto to get your shirts dying white, that means you're putting bleachers out into your garden. So keep in mind the grey water should be feeding that biological entity, which is your living soil. So if you're careful with it, and as I said, I've had 11 years of grey water, and everything from Banksias, grevilleas have all happily grown, camellias, my fruit trees, etc., all with grey water. It's an extraordinary resource.
So yeah, the question was, are they self-cleaning? Yes, the Sam Milani and many of them, and that's just one. There are many other grey water systems out there. every few cycles, it has an air blower system that basically blows out the filters and cleans any lint or soaps or anything that's on there. They're quiet, the same as me. I've got one actually in a walkway between the main house and the studio. It's just a few meters from one of the bedrooms. It's underground. You don't hear it.
And they are
submersible pumps. They go for years.
And they're hassle-free. It's like solar panels. Who's had to maintain a solar panel? They just go up there and quietly do their business. So the other thing too, which Sam Milani talks about, is getting the starter kit. So it's really, really, really important. If you're building a new house, you have to look your plumber in the eye and say, you must separate out, keep the grey water separate. Because what tends to happen, plumbers just generally put the black water, which is the toilet and the kitchen, in with the grey water. So you have one pipe leaving the slab. If that's happened, you've got no chance of doing grey water anymore, because you've mixed the grey water with the black water. So you can't do it. So if you are building again, make sure the plumber keeps the laundry and the shower. It's really easy for them to do. They just need to be instructed. And then there's what's called a starter kit. So that starter kit goes at the side of the new slab, and it allows you to collect that grey water. And if you then put in a grey water system, you've got it ready made to go. So if you go to some of the websites, we mentioned some of those companies that do grey water systems, look for starter kits. If you are building from scratch with a new slab, and there are lots of advantages with slabs. We can talk a little bit about green concrete in a moment.
Yes. Well, I've got a few other things to add as well.
so that will allow you to give you the future proofing. So to me, if you are going to have a big family and you're going to have lots of grey water, you would be mad not to give yourself the opportunity to have that grey water. As I said, it was 100,000 litres of water per year for me in the garden. That's massive. That was about 40% of my water budget. And as David said, you know, we've been plundering our aquifer. So about 45% of the water that comes through your tap, your scheme water, is actually aquifer water. So we are drawing this fossil water, this ancient water, to keep Perth hydrated. And we're plundering this resource. So the Water Corp quite rightly are saying we need to rein in the use of that, and we need to be augmenting, supplementing, replacing that where we can with grey water.
Absolutely. So I just want to pick up on that, take that theme that Chris mentioned about the grey water system and the starter kit, and working with builders and so on to make sure that they do it. So I want to take that and bring it to a bigger picture of the importance of really good design, of course, but getting a very, very clear vision for what you want to achieve here. So we've spoken about things like solar passive design, which has got a whole lot of subtleties and nuance and challenges to it itself, how that integrates with vegetation. We've spoken briefly about renewable energy systems. Chris might have covered that more. Water reuse, Chris mentioned green concrete and the importance of, and I've mentioned recycled materials as well. And I've also brought the aspect from the environmental design and how that links in with community, social equity, and so on like that, and the types of life that you might want to be leading as you're going through an aging process, which we all end up doing. So really what I'm trying to say to you here, folks, is get clear on the vision that you want and come up with a really smart master plan for everything that you want to achieve on that property. Get the professionals in there that you can sit and have design workshops with, sketching it out, getting very, very clear. I know Chris has done that on his property here. The properties at home, my partner and I, in conversation with many people, it was about a 2-year process before we started to build.
Absolutely.
And a number of clients that I've got now, they certainly get a little bit frustrated because they want to get started with it. But I'm saying, hold off on the design process, slow it down, and invariably something comes up. And as soon as you start building, as soon as you've engaged a builder, it's pretty much too late. So it's possible. More questions.
And we've got a fantastic question. Oh, what a great question. So what would you recommend as a first step for a 1960s asbestos-clad, non-insulated home to increase energy efficiency? Well, where do you start?
I need to see a picture of it.
Is that wonderful? And I grew up in a house like that. And we just accepted in Perth that we had awful housing. And I remember we came from Canada And my mum, being Canadian, the first winter here in Perth, she'd be saying to everyone, this is in the early 70s, my God, it's so cold here. And people are going, harden up, you're Canadian, you know. And she'd say, well, in Canada, we had insulation. So number one, and it's really interesting, this shed that you're seeing is a beautiful backdrop, was just a good old shonky asbestos garage. And David Bayer did all this beautiful work. There's all recycled material. So the key is, I would recommend, and I'll let David give his spin on this in a moment, is basically remove the asbestos, because if it's, if you've got that good old fashioned home, it sounds like it was probably on stumps. The beauty of that is those houses were built strong, really good structures. So you can remove the asbestos. That's what we did with our house and the shed. Then you can go in between the noggins and the struts, put fantastic insulation, then put on some really good cladding. And this shed here, which looks like it's just an old corrugated shed, there's actually this thickness of insulation. So what you're seeing is the ceiling and the walls, and that's just an internal recycled material. Then there's 3 layers of insulation, then the walls and the roof. So very important. And the thing with insulation to remember is it's not just the roof, but it's the walls and ideally underneath, because remember, your house leaks. And it's going to leak not just through the roof, but any of those gaps and cracks. And so you can start by removing that asbestos. There are good asbestos removalists that can get rid of that for you. There's a special premium you pay to get it disposed of because it's a hazardous material, but then you can put in insulation. And the key with insulation is gaps. Gaps are very important, because what slows down the transference of heat in summer and heat out of your house in winter is those gaps. So it really helps to slow that down. So good insulation will make a big difference. And then looking at your door frames, your window seals, we always used to say, walk around with some incense on a windy day and just watch how, when the smoke goes horizontal, that means you found a draft, and you can get draft stoppers, insulation, and draft tape. There's lots of things you can do to make a difference that don't have to cost a lot of money.
Correct, Chris. Absolutely. Look, the only thing I would add to Chris, because everything Chris said is absolutely spot on, is, and so for the audience who haven't seen it, the question is, what would you recommend as a first step for a 1960s asbestos-clad, non-insulated home to increase efficiency? My very first step was, yes, I would remove all the asbestos, but my first step would be to sit down, end up with a plan of the home, and design it really, really well, focusing on those first principles of solar passive design. So I don't know what this house design is like, but it might currently be that all the bedrooms are actually on the north facing wall. And I've done this with a number of clients, sitting down and actually completely reconfiguring the internal layout of the home. And at first glance, they're going, what do you mean? Oh, you move my bedrooms around. And I'm going, well, can you imagine shifting that bedroom and having this as what now is your bedroom? And you've got a whole lot of glazing on this north facing wall. And this is giving you all of this winter light. And this is your view out there. Because a lot of our old homes, the back of the house, if it's facing north, it's the old sleep out. And there's no glass there at all. And that's where most of the asbestos is. So everything that Chris said, but go back to the design and the vision first. The only other thing I'd mention with the asbestos is the old sleep outs did have asbestos inside as well in the wet areas. So if you can get rid of it all, a neighbour of mine's doing it. He's just decided he's going to get rid of all the asbestos now, and then he's going to do all the redesign work. A few other things in terms of what Chris mentioned as well. Often the electrics, the plumbing is really old. You don't need to start from scratch, and a lot of it's useful, but there's a few little things in there that you want to look at as well. But once you've got the asbestos out, being timber frame, you can move walls around pretty easily, and you can really improve the design features of the home.
And it's really important. There's a few things. So if you don't want to remove the asbestos, so we'll have the external asbestos and then probably gyprock on the inside. So you've still got the noggins and the struts. So that's the framing. What I did with a house I had in Bicton, the upstairs was just gyprock and gaps and then Western red cedar. So it was like an oven because all the hot air went up to the top. So we bought in there's a company and they drill holes between the noggins and the struts, and then they blow in an insulation into those cavities, and then you seal it back up again. And that gives a massive, massive improvement. So if you don't want to remove the asbestos, asbestos can be painted. It's actually incredibly safe, versatile material if you don't ever work with it.
Yeah.
So keep it sealed and it's fine. So if you didn't want to remove it, you could get that blow-in insulation, can make a massive difference. The other thing too, for energy efficiency, the key, and we'll talk more about this in one of our workshops coming up later, windows are the weak link in the chain. And both David and I have talked about double glazing, which we'll go into more detail at one of our follow-on events. But most windows in Perth are just a recipe for heat to come in summer and heat to lose and be hemorrhaged from your house in winter. So anything you can do to do external shading in summer. So just putting an external cover on those big windows, and get a compass. Your phone will have a compass. Walk around your house, as David said, find out where northeast is and northwest and southeast, southwest. So you know where the sun is going to attack your home in summer and where it can be your best friend in winter. So you can then, as David said, sit down and go, right, we got a big blank wall where there should be winter sun. All right, well, we're designed to cut that out and have windows. So you can do so much. Or we got big windows on the east and the west. Bad news, because that's going to let that summer sun in. Maybe we make that smaller, or we look at external shading. Some of the external shading I've done, and I always say to people, I never want people leaving thinking, oh, it costs too much money to be energy efficient. If you can't afford a couple of stinky old dog blankets, which I did originally on my big east facing windows, I just hung them externally, and that instantly shuts down the shade.
And they wouldn't have been stinky for very long.
No, that's right, the UV. Yeah, that's right. We forget that it is actually profoundly simple to slash power consumption. And when people, you know, say, oh, my power bills are so high, if they just walked around and just touch your windows in your house, if the sun is hitting it in summer, if you touch that window, it will be hot. And if you touch the window in winter, it'll be freezing cold. So what that's telling you is your windows have no ability to buffer you from the hemorrhaging of heat in or out. So anything you can do to protect them really cheaply, simply dog blankets, shade cloth in summer. Longer term, you can put roller shutters, shade sails, beautiful plantings, as David said.
Or you can get them reglazed now.
Or reglazed, yeah,
with more comfort glazing, or e-glass, or indeed, because I imagine a lot of you have some very beautiful timber frame windows there. So you don't want to lose those timber frames. There are a number of reglazers around that can put double glazing into that window frame as well, and that's a huge benefit. Chris mentioned the stinky old dog blankets, but I want to sort of move on to green walls, because I mentioned productive gardens as well. Yeah, you can put a lot of evergreen vines on an east or west facing wall. But one of my favorites is mixed in with an evergreen is passion fruit vines.
Yeah, beautiful.
And they just provide so much shade on that wall in summer, and you're just picking one of the best fruits you can imagine.
It's so cool. And you think about the classic old European homes and castles, they all had ivy growing on them. So one of the things we've done at our place is, if that's the wall, the side of the wall, we put Rio sheeting, which is the sheets you put down in concrete, and we've just fastened them so they're that far off the wall.
100 mils off the wall. Yep.
And then you can just use that Rio sheeting to grow plants. That gap gives you, again, another air buffer, but it allows you to train and really contain where that plant grows. Some of my favorites besides passion fruit, the beautiful things like Virginia or Boston ivy, beautiful deciduous tough creepers. And then one of my favorites is Herbertia scandens, which is the snake vine, and it has beautiful bright yellow flowers, glossy green leaves. It's an Australian native, and it is so tough and resilient, and that gives you beautiful shading.
Absolutely.
So when you mix the two together, you get the deciduous in winter, but also that beautiful green, glossy green with the yellow flowers. Awesome stuff.
Yep. And the benefit of a green wall, especially if you've got a reasonably narrow boundary, it might be a metre or a metre and a half. And I say this to people buying in new developments on the smaller blocks, where they go, you know, I've only got a metre up that side of the building. What can I do there? And I'm going, put in a green wall. Do exactly what Chris said, and you can buy these big sheets, 6 metres by 2.5 metres of Rio. You can very easily fasten them to the external wall, and you can grow, and things will grow in amazingly tight spaces given the right nutrients in the soil and grey water system, year-round water.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to some of the workshops we have coming up. So this is the first of 4 that we will be doing. And they're all on the on the City of South Perth website, and of course the Forever Project website. So we have on the Wednesday, the 20th of April from 6 to 9 p.m. again, another Zoom online. And this one's called Biodiversity. So we'll go into a lot of detail about growing beautiful plants in your landscape, how to attract nature into your garden, all sorts of amazing things to turn your garden into a little bit of an ecological cornucopia, and the benefits for your kids and the rest of the family of getting them out into nature. And you mentioned the beautiful marri trees, one of the great iconic things about the marri. It's one of the preferred foods for the black cockatoos.
We love them and we get a lot of them.
And they're, you know, such a powerful food for them. Then Wednesday, the 4th of May, is our water and fertilise wise and productive gardens in small spaces. So we'll go on about how to improve that horrible sandy soil that you have in South Perth, turn that sand into soil, and how to make sure your garden, your soil is thriving. So it's a biological storehouse. Some of those really important ways to stop the nutrients ending up in our river systems and into the aquifers. So that'll be really, really powerful to really help you become a gardener that can succeed in one of the toughest gardening environments in the world. And we do. If you can garden well in WA, you're a seriously good gardener. And then on Tuesday, the 7th of June, the final for the series, Living Sustainably in the Suburbs. So that's really going to look at permaculture. So how can we have chickens, bees, ducks, food growing in our suburbs? And some of the most extraordinary gardeners and farmers in the world are in WA, because again, conditions are so tough. If you do well, you are seriously good. So these are all, we just need you to register for those, to go online so we know how many people are going to come on. That's really fantastic for us. And that allows you to see what's going on. As well, with the Forever Project, we've got a range of other events coming up. So have a look on our website. And today, if you've really enjoyed about this concept of the inspired infill, if you say, yeah, I really want to develop on my property and do it in a more sustainable way, we have some inspired infill workshops coming up, run by other very generous councils, the City of Stirling and the City of Melville. So it really can allow you to take what we've talked about tonight to a next level. So David, we're getting towards the end of the program now. So that green concrete. So one of those really powerful things, concrete has a massive carbon footprint, doesn't it?
Oh, well, I've been doing a lot of work with Murdoch University over the last 12 months on this and looking for alternatives to concrete, and the precursor of concrete is cement. So what we have is ordinary Portland cement. It's a very high energy intensive process to produce the clinker, then break down the clinker into a fine powder, which becomes the cement, and then turning that cement back into a concrete product, mixing it with virgin aggregates, sand and water, then transporting it to site, and then producing it into something. And depending on how long that building lasts for, has a high energy intensity. If concrete production was a country, it would have the 3rd highest greenhouse gas emissions on the planet.
Wow. Say that one again. That's extraordinary.
If global concrete extraction, manufacture, and production, including installation of buildings, was a country, it would be the 3rd highest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet.
Sitting just below China and the US.
China and the US. So this is, I mean, of course, and embedded in that is the greenhouse emissions of China and the US.
Yes.
It's energy intensive, even more so in Western Australia, because all of the clinker that's the precursor for making cement is actually now imported.
Wow.
We used to produce our own clinker here,
and
we used to get shell and so on out of Coburn Sound and other local areas. That doesn't happen anymore. So talking about concrete, but there's many options with materials, and Chris has been doing a huge amount of work in this space. Chris might have mentioned the Firewise landscaping and so on, but you know, we've both done it on our own properties, where instead of putting in virgin landscape materials, we've gone down to a number of suppliers and actually purchased recycled materials, crushed bricks, repurposed timbers, gabion walls made out of broken bricks and so on. So much of the stuff that would come off a new building site. And here's another fact for you folks. Most new builds these days produce between 30 to 50 cubic meters of waste for every residential home. Thankfully, a lot of that is now recycled. Most of that is sand and bricks and masonry type products. So we're incredibly wasteful, but we can also capture and reuse a lot of that. One of the companies we use that recycle it takes bricks, crushes it down into different scale aggregates. It makes a really lovely path and paving areas and so on like that. So think about that when you're doing your landscaping. Don't necessarily go and buy new or virgin materials.
Indeed.
Think creatively what you can work with what you've already got.
It's so true. So we use a lot of the crushed, and you can get the different colors. So all the hard landscaping. So the hard landscaping, that's the a lot of the pavers that people use, the paths, any of those things that aren't the greenery and landscaping. That hard landscaping, you can get a lot of it recycled now. So it's the mulches and the fine crushed material. So we do, as David said, a lot of landscapes. We just did one for the City of Bayswater at the Morley Public Library. So if you feel like going and looking at a state-of-the-art recycled landscape, it's brand new at the Morley Library, 240 Walter Road West. So if you go onto the City of Bayswater website, you'll see all the details about it, and we'll have some on our website soon. But even with the concrete, there's now green concrete. There's a couple of companies that now, so if you are building, you can source out this green concrete.
You can, yeah. So a lot of the big manufacturers, all of the big ones, the Wholesomes, the Hansons, the BGC, they're now taking what's materials that they're basically adding into their mix. So they're called technically supplementary cementitious materials.
There you go.
Nice,
like it at 9 p.m. Very impressive.
Now you got to spell those words as well. Anyway, they're materials that they got a binding quality and a bulking quality to it, and normally they would have been stuff that would have gone typically to landfill. So it reduces the carbon impacts. But then you can go a whole lot further, and we are now investigating ways where we can make the cement product from waste materials, which ironically comes from the burning of coal. Fly ash, which is one of the byproducts of burning coal, is a cementitious material. It can be turned into a cement. So there's a really interesting circular economy of the moving away from the fossil fuel economy, but we've got a product sitting in these storage dams. And down at Collie, there's 5 million cubic meters of fly ash in storage dams that can be turned into a cement.
So it's very important stuff.
Very important.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So we're just about to wrap up now. This is the last chance for questions, but as well, please fill out the evaluations if you haven't. And if you have enjoyed tonight, it really helps to be able to send just a quick email to the City of South Perth thanking them, because again, they funded these events, and it's really shows great vision for them to actually support these programs, because it's all about empowering you to hopefully do better with less. And so if you have enjoyed it, please remember those dates for the events coming up into the future. So Wednesday, the 20th of April, Wednesday, the 4th of May, and Tuesday, the 7th of June. Have a look on the City of South Perth website. They've probably got free verge or subsidised plants for verge makeovers, and we'll talk more about that on the 20th of April at the event. And again, on the Forever Project website, there's quite a few events we have coming up that are really going to help you design and introduce beautiful native plants into your garden to hopefully make that look better. So I'd like to really thank our fantastic team behind the scenes, Chris and Jacob and Lexi, who have made this run so smoothly, and they've done an amazing job behind the scenes. It's looking like a film set here. Melinda and David, and we have a fantastic team. So we really hope this has been of benefit to you, and we look forward to seeing you at our events coming up into the future. So have a fantastic night, and I hope that this has inspired you to make some changes to your home in South Perth or wherever you are to make it more sustainable. And again, it's following that mantra that we can do better with less. And actually, if you design it well, think about it, as David said, less is actually more. We can
Absolutely.
have a more resilient and sustainable and nourishing future. Thank you for joining us tonight.